Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're diving into some absolutely wild relationship stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and basic human decency. I've got a collection of relationship disasters straight from Reddit that are so unhinged, you'll either feel incredibly grateful for your current situation or start planning your exit strategy. Before we jump in, you know the drill. Comment below what time you're watching this video and where you're watching from, and just know that these stories get progressively more unhinged as we go. So grab whatever, get comfortable, and let's dive right into it. Our first story comes from someone who discovered that their boyfriend's romantic gesture wasn't quite as thoughtful as it seemed. My boyfriend proposed with my own ring. I found out he used money from my savings account to buy it. I've been with Jake for 3 years now, and I thought I knew him pretty well. We've been talking about marriage for the past year, and I was honestly getting impatient, waiting for him to propose. All my friends were getting engaged, and I kept dropping hints about rings I liked and how ready I was to take the next step. A romantic dinner at last month popped the question during Jake Finally Ring was absolutely our favourite restaurant. The style I'd been showing perfect, exactly the him on Pinterest for months. It was this gorgeous, vintage-inspired setting with an oval diamond that caught the light beautifully. I was over the moon and said yes immediately. The proposal was everything I'd dreamed of. But something felt off in the weeks after the engagement. Jake seemed stressed about money and kept making comments about our joint savings account being lower than he expected. We've been splitting expenses and both contributing to a shared account for our future together, mainly for wedding costs and eventually a house down payment. I decided to check our account balance to start planning engagement party expenses, and that's when I discovered a withdrawal for exactly $4,800 from 3 weeks before the proposal. When I asked Jake about it, he got defensive and said he'd used it for something important but didn't want to tell me what. After some pressing, he finally admitted that he'd used our shared savings to buy my engagement ring. He said he wanted to get me something special and that it was technically my money too, so it shouldn't matter. He seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset, saying that we were getting married anyway, so all our money would be shared eventually. I explained that using money I'd saved without asking me felt like stealing, especially to buy me a gift that was supposed to be from him. The gesture felt completely hollow, knowing that I'd essentially bought my own engagement ring. Jake got angry and said I was being ungrateful and materialistic, that the important thing was our commitment to each other, not who paid for what. The worst part is that I'd been saving that money for our wedding and honeymoon. Now we're starting our engagement with $4,800 less than we planned, and I can't even look at my ring without feeling manipulated. Every time someone compliments it, I have to pretend to be excited while knowing the truth about how it was purchased. Jake still doesn't understand why I'm upset. He keeps saying that married couples share everything anyway, and that I'm making a big deal out of nothing. He's told his family that I'm being dramatic about the proposal, and now his mother keeps making comments about how some women are never satisfied. I love Jake, but this whole situation has made me question whether he respects me or my boundaries. If he's willing to take money from our shared account without discussing it, what other financial decisions might he make without consulting me once we're married? That story ends there, and honestly, the level of entitlement here is staggering. He literally stole her money to buy her a gift and then got mad when she wasn't grateful enough. This isn't about being materialistic, it's about basic respect and communication. The fact that he can't understand why secretly spending her savings is problematic shows a fundamental disconnect about partnership. You don't get credit for generosity when you're being generous with someone else's money. Let's move on to our next story, which involves vacation planning gone horribly wrong. My girlfriend asked for a break right before our anniversary trip. I'd already booked everything. She went on the trip with someone else. I've been with Sarah for 2 years, and our anniversary was coming up next month. I'd been planning this amazing trip to celebrate, somewhere we'd talked about going since we first started dating. I spent weeks researching hotels, making restaurant reservations, and booking activities. The whole trip cost me about $3,000, but it felt worth it to celebrate our relationship. 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Sarah asked if we could talk. She seemed distant and said she'd been thinking about our relationship and needed some space to figure things out. She asked for a break, saying she wasn't sure if she was ready for something so serious and needed time to think about what she really wanted. I was devastated, but tried to be understanding. I asked if she wanted to postpone the trip, or if there was anything I could do to work through whatever she was feeling. Sarah said she thought a break would be good for both of us, and that maybe we could talk again in a few weeks. I immediately started trying to cancel our reservations, but most of the bookings were non-refundable. The hotel had a strict cancellation policy, and I'd already paid for flights that couldn't be changed. I was out almost the entire $3,000 with nothing to show for it, except a broken heart and a bunch of confirmation emails. A week after Sarah asked for the break, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Sarah had posted photos from the exact resort I'd booked for our anniversary trip. She was there with some guy I'd never seen before, looking completely happy and relaxed. She'd taken the trip I'd planned for us and brought another man instead. They were at the restaurant I'd made reservations at, doing the activities I'd researched, staying in what looked like the same type of room I'd booked. She was living out our anniversary celebration with someone else, while I sat at home dealing with the financial aftermath of our breakup. I felt sick realizing that she'd probably been planning this for weeks. The timing was too perfect for it to be coincidental. She'd asked for a break right when she knew I couldn't get refunds, then used my research and planning to have a romantic getaway with her new guy. When she got back, Sarah called wanting to talk about getting back together. She said the break had helped her realize how much she missed me and that she was ready to commit fully to our relationship. She acted like nothing had happened and seemed confused when I brought up the trip. Sarah claimed it was just a coincidence that she'd ended up at the same place, that her friend had suggested it, and she'd thought it would help clear her head. She said I was being paranoid and that she hadn't done anything wrong since we were on a break. I asked her directly if she'd been seeing the guy in her photos before she asked for our break, and she got defensive. She said what she did during our break was none of my business, and that I was being controlling by questioning her choices. The manipulation was so obvious that I couldn't believe she thought I'd fall for it. She'd essentially used me as a travel agent to plan her romantic getaway with another guy, then expected me to welcome her back with open arms when she was done. That story is absolutely brutal because of how calculated the whole thing was. She didn't just cheat, she used his research, his planning, and his financial loss to fund her affair. The timing of asking for a break right when cancellations became impossible shows this was premeditated, and then having the audacity to come back and act like he was being unreasonable for questioning her choices. Sometimes people show you exactly who they are through their actions, and this woman showed she's capable of breathtaking selfishness. Our next story takes us into the realm of privacy violations that'll make you rethink how much you share with your partner. My partner told their friends about our intimate arguments. Now I can't look at them without feeling exposed. I've been with Alex for about 1.5 years, and we have a pretty solid relationship overall. Like any couple, we have our disagreements and arguments, but I always thought we handled them privately and maturely. We've had some pretty intense conversations about personal stuff, family issues, and things that happened in our past relationships. Last weekend, we went to a party at Alex's friend's house. I don't know their friend group super well, but I've hung out with them a few times, and they seem like decent people. Everything was going fine until I overheard a conversation that made me want to disappear into the floor. I was getting drinks in the kitchen when I heard Alex's friend Marcus making a joke about something that sounded eerily familiar. He was talking to another friend about how funny it was when people get emotional about their parents' divorce, specifically mentioning details about crying and family therapy that were extremely specific to an argument Alex and I had just last month. I realized with horror that Marcus was essentially recounting word for word a very personal fight Alex and I had about my family situation. It was something I'd shared in confidence during a vulnerable moment, and hearing it turned into entertainment for their friend group made me feel completely violated. I stayed in the kitchen longer, hoping I was wrong about what I was hearing. But then another friend joined the conversation and brought up something about financial insecurity and fear of commitment that was directly from another private conversation Alex and I had weeks earlier. They were discussing my personal issues, like they were plot points in a TV show. The worst part was hearing them psychoanalyze me based on information that Alex had shared. They were making judgments about my character and my emotional stability based on my most vulnerable moments, things I'd only shared because I trusted Alex completely. I felt completely exposed and betrayed. These people knew intimate details about my fears, my insecurities, and my family problems. They knew things about me that I hadn't even told my closest friends, and they were discussing them casually over drinks like it was public information. When we got home, I confronted Alex about what I'd overheard. At first, they denied sharing anything personal, but when I repeated specific details I'd heard, they couldn't keep lying. Alex admitted to telling their friends about our arguments, but said they were just looking for advice and support. Alex explained that they talked to their friends when they were frustrated or confused about our relationship, and that sharing details helped them process their feelings. They said everyone talks to their friends about relationship problems, and that I was overreacting to something completely normal. I tried to explain that there's a difference between asking for general advice and sharing word-for-word accounts of private conversations. The things Alex had shared weren't just about our relationship dynamics. They were about my personal traumas and insecurities that had nothing to do with our dating life. Alex got defensive and said they needed people to talk to, and that I couldn't expect them to keep everything completely private. They said their friends were trustworthy, and that I was being paranoid about people who cared about both of us. But the damage was done. Now every time we're around Alex's friends, I feel like they're seeing right through me. They know things about my mental health, my family dysfunction, and my deepest fears. I can't relax or be myself because I'm constantly wondering what else Alex has shared and what judgments they've formed about me. The trust in our relationship feels completely broken. I don't know how to be vulnerable with Alex anymore, knowing that my private moments might become conversation topics at the next party. It's changed the entire dynamic of how we communicate, and I don't know if we can come back from this level of betrayal. This story hits different because it's about the violation of emotional intimacy, which can be just as damaging as physical betrayal. When you share your deepest fears and traumas with someone, you're giving them pieces of your soul that aren't meant for public consumption. The fact that Alex turned those vulnerable moments into entertainment for friends shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what partnership means. Trust isn't just about fidelity, it's about being a safe space for the person you love. Or let's dive into our next story, which deals with the grey area between friendship and emotional infidelity. I found out my fiancé still texts his ex every night. He says it's just friendship, but I don't know if I can trust him. I've been engaged to David for 6 months now, and we're supposed to get married next spring. We've been together for 3 years total, and I thought we had a really solid foundation of trust and communication. David has always been open about his past relationships, and the fact that he's still friends with a few of his exes. When we first started dating, David mentioned that he'd dated someone named Lisa for about 2 years before we met. They broke up amicably about 6 months before David and I started seeing each other, and he said they'd remained friends. I was fine with this because I'm also friends with some of my exes, and I think mature adults can maintain friendships after romantic relationships end. What I didn't know was the extent of their ongoing communication. I discovered this completely by accident last week when David's phone kept buzzing during a movie we were watching. He'd left it on the coffee table, and I could see the notifications lighting up the screen. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I couldn't help noticing that every notification was from Lisa. The messages were coming in every few minutes for over an hour, and I started wondering what could possibly require such constant communication between ex-partners. When I mentioned it to David, he brushed it off and said Lisa was going through a rough time and needed someone to talk to. He said they'd always had a strong friendship component to their relationship and that he felt obligated to support her through difficult periods. I asked how often they typically talk, and David said they text pretty regularly, but it wasn't anything romantic. When I pressed for more details, he admitted they talk every night, usually for at least an hour, sometimes longer. I was shocked. David and I don't even talk every night when we're not together, and here he was having daily lengthy conversations with his ex-girlfriend. I asked what they talk about for so long every single night, and David said they discuss their days, work problems, family stuff, and general life updates. That sounded like relationship-level communication to me, not casual friendship. I asked David how he would feel if I was texting my ex-boyfriend every night for hours, and he said it would depend on the context and content of the conversations. I requested to see some of their messages, not because I wanted to violate his privacy, but because I needed to understand what kind of friendship required such constant communication. David got defensive and said he wasn't comfortable showing me private conversations with his friend. This made me even more suspicious. If their communication was truly platonic and innocent, why couldn't I see it? David said it wasn't about hiding anything from me, but about respecting Lisa's privacy and maintaining appropriate boundaries in friendships. I pointed out that texting another woman every single night seemed like crossing boundaries, not maintaining them. David accused me of being jealous and controlling, saying that I was trying to isolate him from his friends. The situation escalated when I suggested that maybe David should reduce the frequency of his communication with Lisa out of respect for our engagement. David said he wasn't willing to abandon a friend just because I felt insecure about their relationship. I clarified that I wasn't asking him to abandon anyone, just to establish some boundaries that would make me more comfortable. Daily hour-long conversations with an ex felt inappropriate for someone who was about to get married. David said he'd think about it, but I could tell he was resentful about my request. Over the next few days, I noticed he was being secretive with his phone and taking calls in private. When I asked if he was still talking to Lisa every night, he said yes, but that he was being more discreet about it to avoid making me uncomfortable. This didn't solve the problem at all. Now I felt like David was choosing to prioritize his relationship with Lisa over my feelings, and he was being sneaky about their communication on top of it. The whole situation was making me question whether David was emotionally available for our marriage, or if part of his heart was still tied to his ex. That story ends there. And honestly, this is one of those situations where both people have valid points, but the execution is all wrong. Daily hour-long conversations with an ex do cross boundaries for most people in committed relationships, and the secrecy makes it worse. But demanding to see private messages isn't the answer either. The real issue is that David doesn't seem to care how his behaviour affects his future wife, which doesn't bode well for their marriage. Let's jump into our next story, which deals with priorities that'll make you question whether some people should be allowed to date at all. My boyfriend cancelled my birthday dinner for a video game launch. He said, "You'll have other birthdays, this only happens once." I've been dating Marcus for about 8 months now, and my birthday was last Friday. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks because Marcus had promised to take me somewhere special to celebrate. He knows I love trying new restaurants, so he said he'd make a reservation at this fancy place downtown that I'd been wanting to go to forever. I took the day off work and spent the afternoon getting ready. I bought a new dress, did my hair and makeup, the whole 9 yards. Marcus was supposed to pick me up at 7, and I was honestly excited to have a romantic evening together. We hadn't been on a proper date in a while because he'd been busy with work and his gaming stuff. Around 6:30, Marcus called and said he needed to push dinner back by an hour because something had come up. I was a little annoyed but figured an hour delay wasn't the end of the world. I used the extra time to perfect my makeup and take some photos in my new dress. 7:30 came and went with no word from Marcus. I texted him, asking if everything was okay, and he said he was running late but would be there soon. By 8:15 I was getting worried and frankly pretty irritated. The restaurant had probably given away our reservation by now. That's when Marcus called with news that made my jaw drop. He said he was really sorry, but he wasn't going to be able to make dinner after all. Apparently, his favourite video game was releasing a major expansion pack at midnight, and his gaming group had decided to start playing together at 9 to prepare for the launch. I thought he was joking at first. I asked if he was seriously cancelling my birthday dinner to play video games, and Marcus got defensive. He said this wasn't just any video game, it was something he'd been waiting for all year. The expansion only launched once, and his guild had been planning this gaming session for months. Marcus tried to explain that video game launches were special events that brought communities together, and that missing it would let down his teammates, who were counting on him. He said I could have a birthday dinner any time, but this gaming experience was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I pointed out that birthdays are also once a year, and this particular birthday dinner had been planned for weeks. Marcus said he understood I was disappointed, but that I was being unreasonable by asking him to miss something so important to him just for a regular dinner. He suggested we could celebrate my birthday the next day instead, maybe grab lunch or see a movie. Marcus seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset, saying that postponing by one day shouldn't be such a big deal, since the important thing was spending time together, not the specific date. I told Marcus that it wasn't about the date itself, it was about the fact that he was prioritizing a video game over our relationship and my feelings. He'd made a commitment to celebrate my birthday, and he was breaking it for something completely optional. Marcus argued that his optional gaming commitments weren't because he'd made to his online promises friends who were depending on him. He said I should understand that he had obligations to other people besides me, and that being in a relationship didn't mean abandoning all his other interests and friendships. The conversation ended with Marcus saying he hoped I'd come around and understand his position, but that he wasn't going to change his mind about the gaming session. He said he'd make it up to me over the weekend, and that this whole situation was being blown out of proportion. I spent my birthday night alone in my fancy dress, ordering takeout and watching Netflix. Marcus posted photos on social media throughout the night of him and his gaming setup, clearly having the time of his life with his virtual friends, while I sat at home feeling completely unimportant. The next day, Marcus texted asking if I wanted to grab coffee and act like nothing had happened. When I told him I was still hurt about the night before, he said I was holding grudges over something silly and that he'd already apologised. He couldn't understand why I was still upset when he'd offered to make alternative plans. That story ends there, and honestly, this is where you realise some people have completely warped priorities. Choosing a video game expansion over your girlfriend's birthday shows exactly where she ranks in his life. The fact that he genuinely couldn't understand why she was upset makes it even worse. This isn't about gaming being bad, it's about basic respect and following through on commitments. You don't get to unilaterally decide that your partner's important moments don't matter because something more fun came up. Moving on to a story that will make you question whether honesty is always the best policy in relationships. My girlfriend told me she's not attracted to me anymore, but she still wants to stay together for comfort. I've been with Rachel for almost 2 years now, and I thought we had a pretty good relationship. We live together, split expenses, and generally get along well day to day. Our physical intimacy had been declining over the past few months, but I figured that was normal for couples who've been together a while and are dealing with work stress. Last week, Rachel and I were having one of those deep late-night conversations that couples sometimes have about the future and where our relationship was heading. I asked her if she was happy with us, and she said she needed to tell me something that had been on her mind for a while. Rachel explained that over the past 6 months, she gradually stopped feeling physically attracted to me. She said it wasn't anything specific I'd done wrong, but that the romantic spark had just faded for her. She still cared about me deeply and loved me as a person, but the physical and romantic feelings weren't there anymore. I was obviously hurt and asked if there was anything I could do to change how she felt. Rachel said she didn't think attraction was something that could be forced or manufactured, and that she'd already tried to reignite those feelings without success. She'd been hoping they would come back naturally, but they hadn't. My next question was whether she wanted to break up, since it seemed like we were missing a pretty fundamental component of romantic relationships. Rachel's answer completely caught me off guard. She said she didn't want to break up because she was comfortable with our life together and didn't want to deal with the hassle of dating again. Rachel explained that we worked well as companions and roommates, and that she valued our emotional connection even without the physical aspect. She said breaking up would be disruptive to both our lives, financially and logistically, and she didn't see why we couldn't just continue as we were. I pointed out that continuing a relationship where one person isn't attracted to the other seemed unfair to both of us. Rachel disagreed, saying that attraction wasn't the most important thing in long-term relationships anyway. She said plenty of couples stay together after the initial passion fades, and that our situation wasn't that different. When I asked about intimacy and whether she expected us to live like roommates forever, Rachel said she was willing to maintain physical intimacy occasionally to keep me happy, even though she wouldn't particularly enjoy it. She presented this like it was a generous compromise on her part. I felt terrible hearing that she'd been essentially forcing herself to be intimate with me out of obligation rather than desire. The thought that she'd been going through the motions while feeling nothing made me sick to my stomach. I told her I didn't want pity intimacy from someone who wasn't attracted to me. Rachel got frustrated and said I was being dramatic about something that wasn't that big of a deal. She said most long-term relationships involve some level of compromise, and that expecting to feel butterflies forever was unrealistic. She accused me of prioritizing physical attraction over our deeper connection. I tried to explain that it wasn't about butterflies or constant passion, but about basic romantic compatibility. Being with someone who openly admits they're not attracted to you feels degrading and lonely, even if they're willing to go through the motions. Rachel said she thought I was overreacting and that we should just continue as we were without making it a big dramatic issue. She said attraction might come back eventually, and that throwing away a good relationship over something so shallow would be stupid. The conversation ended with Rachel saying she'd given me the gift of honesty and that most people would appreciate having such an open and mature partner. She couldn't understand why I seemed more upset after she'd been truthful with me, rather than continuing to fake attraction. Now I'm left wondering whether to stay in a relationship where my partner sees me as a comfortable roommate rather than someone she actually desires. Rachel acts like nothing has changed, but I can't stop thinking about her confession every time she's affectionate with me. That story ends right there, and honestly, this might be one of the most soul-crushing things you can hear from a partner. Rachel thinks she's being mature and practical, but she's essentially asking OP to accept being in a relationship where he's tolerated rather than wanted. The fact that she frames pity intimacy as a generous compromise shows how disconnected she is from basic human emotional needs. Sometimes, honesty without empathy is just cruelty disguised as communication. Let's dive into our next story about digital deception that reveals just how creative people can get when they want to live double lives. I discovered my partner's secret second Instagram. It was full of flirty messages with strangers. I've been with Jordan for about a year and a half, and we've been pretty serious about each other. We follow each other on social media, comment on each other's posts, and I thought we were pretty transparent about our online presence. Jordan's always been active on Instagram, posting photos and stories regularly, and I enjoyed seeing glimpses into their daily life when we weren't together. A few weeks ago, I was using Jordan's phone to look up directions while they were driving, and a notification popped up from Instagram. What was weird was that the notification was for an account I'd never seen before. The username was similar to Jordan's main account, but with some numbers added at the end. I didn't think too much about it at first, but later that day I got curious and decided to search for that username. The account was private, so I couldn't see any posts, but I could see it definitely belonged to Jordan based on the profile picture. I was confused about why they would have a second Instagram account and not mention it to me. That night, I asked Jordan about the second account casually, just saying I'd seen the notification and was wondering what it was for. Jordan seemed surprised and a little flustered, then explained that it was just a backup account they use for following certain interests and hobbies that they didn't want cluttering up their main feed. The explanation seemed reasonable enough, but something about Jordan's reaction made me feel like there was more to the story. They seemed nervous when I brought it up and quickly changed the subject when I asked what kind of content they followed on the backup account. Over the next few days, I noticed Jordan being more secretive with their phone than usual. They started taking it with them to the bathroom and keeping it face down when we were hanging out together. The behaviour was subtle, but it was definitely different from how they normally acted around me. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to do something I'm not proud of. When Jordan was in the shower, I looked at their phone. I knew their passcode because they'd given it to me months ago for emergencies, and they'd never changed it. What I found on that second Instagram account made my stomach drop. It wasn't just a backup account for following hobbies. Jordan had been actively posting photos and stories, and more importantly, they'd been having lengthy, flirty conversations with multiple different people in the comments and direct messages. The posts were mostly thirst trap style photos that Jordan had never posted on their main accounts. They were clearly designed to get attention and comments from strangers, and the comments section was full of fire emojis, heart eyes, and suggestive remarks from people I'd never heard of. But the direct messages were even worse. Jordan had been having ongoing conversations with at least 5 different people, exchanging compliments, making plans to meet up, and engaging in the kind of flirty banter that definitely crossed relationship boundaries. Some of the conversations had been going on for months. One conversation in particular made me feel sick. Jordan had been talking to someone who lived in our city, and they'd been making plans to hang out in person. Jordan had described themselves as single in this conversation and had been complaining about being lonely and wanting to meet someone fun. I took screenshots of the most damning conversations because I knew Jordan would probably deny everything if I confronted them without proof. Then I put the phone back and tried to act normal when they came out of the shower, even though my heart was racing and I felt like throwing up. The next day, I confronted Jordan with the evidence I'd found. At first, they tried to deny that the conversations were flirty or inappropriate, saying they were just being friendly with people who commented on their posts. When I showed them the screenshots, they couldn't keep up that lie. Jordan then admitted to the flirting but said it was harmless and that they'd never actually met up with anyone in person. They said it was just fun online interaction that didn't mean anything, and that I was overreacting to some casual social media activity. I pointed out that describing themselves as single and making plans to meet people wasn't casual social media activity. Jordan got defensive and said they felt suffocated in our relationship and needed some outlet for feeling attractive and desired by other people. When I asked why they hadn't just talked to me about feeling suffocated instead of creating a secret account to flirt with strangers, Jordan said they didn't think I would understand. They said everyone needs validation from outside their relationship sometimes, and that this was their way of getting that without actually cheating. The conversation ended with Jordan saying they'd delete the account if it made me more comfortable, but that they thought I was being controlling and jealous over something that wasn't really cheating. They couldn't understand why I was so upset about online interactions that hadn't led to anything physical. That story wraps up there, and the mental gymnastics here are incredible. Jordan created an entire secret identity to flirt with strangers, told people they were single, made plans to meet up, and then called it harmless online interaction. This isn't about needing validation. It's about wanting to have their cake and eat it too. The fact that they framed OP as controlling for being upset about literal deception shows they still don't understand what they did wrong. Our next story involves reproductive choices and how quickly someone's stance can change when their past comes knocking. My boyfriend said he'd never want kids until his ex got pregnant. Now he's pressuring me to reconsider. I've been with Marcus for 3 years, and one of the things that initially bonded us was our shared view on having children. Neither of us wanted kids, and we were both relieved to find someone who felt the same way. It's such a fundamental compatibility issue that I was thrilled to be with someone who didn't expect me to change my mind or assume I'd come around eventually. Marcus was actually more adamant about it than I was. He'd talk about how expensive kids are, how they ruin your freedom, and how he couldn't imagine wanting to be responsible for another human being. He'd point out couples we knew who seemed miserable after having babies and say he was glad we'd never go through that. When we moved in together last year, we had several conversations about our future and what we both wanted. Marcus repeatedly emphasized that he was certain about not wanting children and that it wasn't something he'd ever reconsider. I felt so secure in our relationship knowing we were completely aligned on such a major life decision. 3 months ago, Marcus started acting differently. He seemed distracted and was spending a lot of time on his phone, but when I asked if everything was okay, he'd brush me off and say work was just stressful. He started making weird comments about babies we'd see in public, like how cute they were or how well-behaved certain kids seemed. I thought it was strange since Marcus had never shown any interest in other people's children before, but I figured maybe he was just noticing them more as he got older. Some of my friends had gone through phases where they suddenly became aware of babies everywhere, even when they didn't want their own. Last month, Marcus told me he needed to share something that had been weighing on him. His ex-girlfriend, Emma, who he'd dated for about 2 years before we got together, had reached out to let him know she was pregnant. She wanted him to know because the timing meant there was a possibility the baby could be his. I was shocked because Marcus had never mentioned being in contact with Emma at all during our relationship. He explained that they'd had a brief encounter about 4 months ago when they ran into each other at a mutual friend's party. He said they'd both been drinking and one thing led to another, but it was just a one-time mistake that didn't mean anything. The betrayal of him cheating was devastating enough, but then Marcus dropped an even bigger bombshell. He said that finding out about Emma's pregnancy had made him realize he might actually want to be a father. He'd been doing a lot of thinking over the past few months and decided that maybe having kids wouldn't be so bad after all. Marcus explained that the possibility of having a biological child out there had awakened some kind of paternal instinct in him that he didn't know existed. He said he'd been imagining what it would be like to be a dad and had started to find the idea appealing rather than terrifying. Then came the part that made me feel completely blindsided. Marcus said that if Emma's baby turned out to be his, he wanted to be involved as a father. And if we were going to stay together, he thought we should consider having kids of our own, so I wouldn't feel left out or like he was choosing his other family over me. I pointed out that 3 years of adamant child-free declarations couldn't just be erased because he'd potentially knocked up his ex during an affair. Marcus said people were allowed to change their minds about major life decisions, and that this situation had given him new perspective on what he really wanted. When I asked what would happen if I didn't want children, Marcus said he hoped I'd be open to reconsidering, since our relationship meant so much to him. He said he couldn't imagine losing me, but that he also couldn't ignore these new feelings about fatherhood that Emma's pregnancy had triggered. The whole conversation felt surreal. Not only had Marcus cheated on me and potentially gotten another woman pregnant, but he was now trying to use that situation to pressure me into completely restructuring my life plans. He seemed to expect me to be understanding about his affair and accommodating about his sudden desire for children. Marcus kept emphasizing that Emma's pregnancy had been a wake-up call about what really mattered to him, and that he wanted to build a family with me if the circumstances worked out right. He couldn't understand why I seemed more upset after he'd been honest about his feelings and his mistakes. Last week, Emma got the paternity test results back, and the baby isn't Marcus's. I thought this news would make him realise how ridiculous his sudden parenting obsession had been, but instead he said it just confirmed that he wanted kids with the right person, meaning me. Now Marcus is talking about our future family like it's a given, showing me articles about pregnancy and making comments about how good we'd be as parents. He acts like I'm being stubborn by sticking to our original agreement about not having children. And he keeps saying that real love requires compromise and growth. That story ends there, and wow, the manipulation here is next level. Marcus cheated, potentially got his ex pregnant, then used that situation to completely flip the script on their entire relationship foundation. The fact that he's still pushing for kids, even after finding out the baby wasn't his, shows. This isn't about sudden paternal instincts, it's about control. You can't cheat on someone and then demand they restructure their life to accommodate your affair-induced epiphanies. Let's move into another story about boundaries that apparently don't exist when you're dealing with certain types of people. My girlfriend invited her ex to our apartment while I was at work. She said it was no big deal, but I found his jacket on our couch. I've been living with my girlfriend Amy for about 8 months now, and things have been going pretty well overall. We split rent and bills evenly, and I thought we had a good understanding about boundaries and respect for our shared space. Amy has mentioned her ex-boyfriend Derek a few times, usually in the context of funny stories from college or explaining why she doesn't like certain restaurants they used to go to together. Amy always described their breakup as mutual and drama-free, and she said they'd remained on friendly terms, even though they don't hang out regularly. I was fine with this because I'm also cordial with some of my exes, and I think it's mature when people can end relationships without burning bridges. Last Tuesday I came home from work around 6 in the evening, expecting to find Amy cooking dinner or watching TV like she usually does. Instead, the apartment felt different somehow. There was an unfamiliar cologne smell in the air, and I noticed that our living room had been tidied up more than usual, like someone had been trying to make a good impression. I called out to Amy that I was home, and she emerged from the bedroom looking slightly flustered. Her hair was messier than it had been when I left for work, and she was wearing a different outfit than what she'd had on that morning. When I asked how her day had been, she said it was fine, and that she'd just been relaxing at home. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was bothering me. Amy seemed nervous and kept checking her phone more than usual during dinner. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she was just tired and had been having a lazy day. It wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a men's jacket draped over the back of our couch that definitely didn't belong to me. It was a brown leather jacket in a style I'd never wear, and it smelled like that cologne I'd noticed when I first walked in. I brought the jacket to Amy and asked whose it was. She looked panicked for a moment, then said it belonged to Derek. She explained that he'd stopped by earlier to return some books she'd lent him, and he must have forgotten his jacket when he left. I asked why she hadn't mentioned that Derek had been over when I asked about her day. Amy said it had slipped her mind because it was such a brief visit and she didn't think it was worth mentioning. She seemed annoyed that I was making a big deal out of something so insignificant. When I pressed for more details about Derek's visit, Amy's story started to change. First, she said he'd only stayed for a few minutes to drop off the books. Then she admitted they'd talked for a while to catch up. Eventually, she revealed that Derek had been there for about 3 hours, from noon until 3 in the afternoon. I pointed out that a 3-hour visit wasn't something you just forget to mention to your live-in boyfriend. Amy got defensive and said she didn't realise she needed to provide a minute-by-minute account of her day to me. She accused me of being controlling and said Derek was just a friend now. The fact that Amy had been dishonest about Derek's visit from the very beginning made me suspicious about what had actually happened during those 3 hours. I asked directly if anything inappropriate had occurred, and Amy seemed offended that I would even suggest such a thing. Amy insisted that she and Derek had just talked and caught up on each other's lives, nothing more. She said they'd watched a movie and shared some takeout, which explained why the living room had been cleaned up and why she'd changed clothes afterward. When I asked why she felt the need to lie about Derek being over if it was truly innocent, Amy said she hadn't lied, she'd just forgotten. She claimed that she knew I'd be weird about her hanging out with her ex, so she hadn't thought to bring it up immediately. I explained that her preemptive dishonesty actually made the situation look much worse than it probably was. If Derek was really just a friend returning books, there would be no reason to hide his visit or act nervous when I came home. Amy said she could see how the situation looked suspicious, but that she resented being treated like she was untrustworthy when she hadn't done anything wrong. She said Derek was an important friend from her past and she wasn't going to stop seeing him just because I felt insecure. The conversation ended with Amy saying she'd be more transparent about her friendships in the future, but that I needed to work on my jealousy issues if our relationship was going to succeed. She made it sound like my discomfort with her secret ex visits was a character flaw I needed to overcome. That story ends right there, and the red flags are everywhere. 3-hour mystery visits, outfit changes, suspicious tidying, immediate lies, and then trying to flip it back on OP for being insecure. The fact that she cleaned up and changed clothes after Derek left tells you everything you need to know about what kind of visit this really was. You don't forget to mention that your ex spent half the afternoon in your shared apartment. You deliberately omit it. Our next story takes us into the realm of family relationships and how some people can compartmentalize their lives in truly disturbing ways. My partner's family doesn't know I exist. After 2 years of dating, I'm still just a friend when I'm around them. I've been with Taylor for almost 2 years now, and we have what I thought was a pretty serious relationship. We spend most nights together, go on trips, and have talked about moving in together next year. Taylor has met my entire family, comes to holiday gatherings, and my parents absolutely adore them. I assumed our relationship had reached the level where family integration was natural and expected. The first time I met Taylor's family was about 6 months into our relationship. Taylor had invited me to their nephew's birthday party, and I was excited to finally meet their parents and siblings. I'd heard so many stories about them that I felt like I already knew everyone. When we arrived at the party, Taylor introduced me to everyone as their friend from work. I was confused, but figured maybe Taylor wanted to ease their family into the idea of us dating, the entire along with it. Throughout So I Went, Taylor Party was careful to maintain physical distance from me and avoided any behaviour that might suggest we were romantically involved. After the party, I asked Taylor why they'd introduced me as a friend instead of their partner. Taylor said their family was old-fashioned about relationships and that they wanted to wait until things were more serious between us before making any announcements. They promised that next time they'd be more open about our relationship status. Several months passed, and I attended a few more family events with Taylor. Each time, I was introduced as a friend, and Taylor continued to act like we barely knew each other when their family was around. I started to feel like I was living a double life, being intimate and committed in private, but having to pretend we were casual acquaintances in public. I brought up the situation again around our 1-year anniversary, pointing out that we'd been together long enough for Taylor's family to know the truth. Taylor said they understood my frustration, but that their family dynamics were complicated and they needed more time to figure out the right approach. Taylor explained that their parents had very specific expectations about the type of person they should end up with, and that our relationship might be difficult for them to accept initially. They said they wanted to protect both me and their family from potential conflict by waiting until they felt confident about our long-term prospects. I asked what Taylor meant by their family's expectations and whether there was something about me specifically that their parents would object to. Taylor was vague, saying it wasn't about me personally, but about timing and circumstances that were hard to explain. As we approached our 2nd anniversary, I was getting increasingly frustrated with the secrecy. I felt like Taylor was ashamed of me or didn't see our relationship as legitimate enough to share with their family. The constant pretending was taking an emotional toll, and I was tired of feeling like a dirty secret. At Taylor's sister's wedding last month, I reached a breaking point. I watched Taylor dance with their family, give speeches about love and commitment, and celebrate their sister's happiness, while continuing to introduce me as just a friend to anyone who asked. During the reception, Taylor's aunt asked me how long I'd known Taylor and whether I was dating anyone special. I had to lie and say I was single, while watching my partner of nearly 2 years laugh and joke with cousins who had no idea we shared a bed every night. After the wedding, I told Taylor that I couldn't continue living this double life anymore. I said that if they weren't ready to acknowledge our relationship to their family after 2 years, then maybe they weren't as committed as they claimed to be. Taylor got upset and said I was being unfair by pressuring them about something so personal and complicated. They said their family relationships were separate from our romantic relationship, and that I should be secure enough in our connection not to need external validation from people I barely knew. I tried to explain that it wasn't about validation. It was about feeling like a legitimate part of Taylor's life, instead of a side character they had to hide. I said that healthy relationships involve integration with important people in both partners' lives, not elaborate deception campaigns. Taylor said they loved me and wanted to be with me, but that their family situation was unique and required patience. They promised that eventually things would change, but they couldn't give me a timeline or specific plan for when that might happen. The conversation ended with Taylor saying they hoped I could understand their position and continue supporting them through this difficult family dynamic. They made it sound like I was being selfish by wanting basic acknowledgement of our relationship's existence. Last week, I overheard Taylor talking to their best friend about relationship problems. Taylor was complaining about feeling pressured to make commitments they weren't ready for, and wondering whether they should break up with someone who was pushing them toward a more serious relationship than they wanted. I realised that while I thought we were building toward a future together, Taylor saw me as someone who was demanding too much too quickly. After 2 years of dating, they still didn't consider our relationship serious enough to share with their family or worthy of public acknowledgement. That story ends there, and honestly, this is emotional torture disguised as consideration for family feelings. 2 years of being hidden from someone's family isn't about timing or complicated dynamics. It's about not being valued enough to be worth the potential awkwardness. Taylor is keeping OP as a placeholder while maintaining complete freedom to present themselves as single to their family and anyone else who matters to them. Let's dive into our next story about employment deception that shows just how elaborate some lies can become. I found out my fiancé lied about his job. He's been unemployed for months, but kept pretending to go to work. I've been engaged to Michael for 8 months now, and we're supposed to get married next summer. We've been together for 2.5 years total, and I thought I knew everything about him. Michael works in marketing at a mid-sized company downtown, or at least that's what I believed until last week. Michael has always been really dedicated to his career, often working late and bringing work stress home with him. He'd complain about difficult clients and demanding deadlines, and I'd try to be supportive by listening to his work problems and encouraging him when projects weren't going well. About 4 months ago, Michael started seeming even more stressed than usual about work. He said his company was going through restructuring and that everyone was worried about layoffs. He'd come home exhausted and frustrated, talking about having to work extra hard to prove his value to management during uncertain times. Michael's work schedule became increasingly erratic around that time. Some days he'd leave early for important meetings. Other days he'd come home in the middle of the afternoon, saying he'd finished his projects ahead of schedule. When I asked about the inconsistent hours, he said the restructuring had made everyone's schedules unpredictable. Last month I decided to surprise Michael at work with lunch since he'd been so stressed lately. I thought bringing his favourite sandwiches from the deli near his office might brighten his day and give us a chance to spend some time together during his busy week. When I arrived at Michael's office building, I went to the reception desk and asked them to call up to Michael's department. The receptionist looked confused and said there was no one by that name working in the building. I figured maybe I had the wrong floor, so I asked her to check the company directory. After searching their system, the receptionist confirmed that Michael had never worked for that company. She suggested I might have the wrong building, or that perhaps Michael worked for a different company with a similar name. I was baffled because I'd dropped Michael off at this exact building numerous times. I sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour, trying to figure out what was happening. I called Michael and asked where he was, and he said he was in back-to-back meetings all afternoon and couldn't talk. When I asked which floor his office was on, he gave me a specific floor number that the receptionist had confirmed didn't house the company he claimed to work for. That evening, I confronted Michael about my visit to his office building. I told him the receptionist had no record of him working there, and I asked him to explain what was going on. Michael looked panicked and started stammering about how there must have been some mistake or confusion. Eventually, Michael broke down and admitted that he'd been laid off 4 months ago during the company restructuring he'd mentioned. He said he'd been too embarrassed to tell me because he knew how much I valued financial stability, and he'd been hoping to find a new job before I found out about the layoff. I asked Michael what he'd been doing every day when he pretended to go to work. He said he'd been spending his days at coffee shops and the library, applying for jobs and going to interviews. He'd been maintaining the pretense of having a job to avoid disappointing me and to keep our relationship stable during an already stressful time. When I asked how he'd been paying his share of our expenses, Michael admitted that he'd been using his savings and credit cards to maintain his financial contributions to our relationship. He'd been going into debt to keep up the illusion that he was still employed and financially stable. I was devastated by the months of deception, but I was also confused about why Michael felt he couldn't trust me with the truth. I asked him why he thought I'd react so badly to him losing his job that he'd rather lie to me every single day for 4 months. Michael said he knew how important it was to me to be unsuccessful, and he, with someone ambitious, was afraid I'd lose respect for him if I knew he'd been unemployed. He said he'd seen how I talked about friends whose partners couldn't keep steady jobs, and he didn't want to become someone I looked down on. I tried to explain that being laid off during company restructuring wasn't the same as being unable to keep a job, and that I would have been supportive if he'd been honest with me. Michael said he'd convinced himself he'd find new employment quickly and that I'd never have to know about the gap in his career. The conversation revealed that Michael had been living an incredibly stressful double life, maintaining detailed stories about fake work projects and fictional co-workers to support his deception. He'd been researching his supposed industry to make his lies more convincing, and he'd even created fake work emails to show me when I asked about his day. Michael begged me to forgive him and said he'd never lie to me again about anything. He said he'd learned his lesson about the importance of honesty in relationships, and that he'd been planning to tell me the truth once he found a new job. I told Michael that I needed time to process the revelation that our entire relationship for the past 4 months had been built on lies. I said I didn't know how to trust him anymore when he'd proven capable of such elaborate and sustained deception about Michael said he understood my something so fundamental. Anger, but hoped I could see that everything he'd done had been motivated by love and fear of losing me. He couldn't understand why I seemed more upset about the lies than relieved that he'd been working so hard to protect our relationship. That story ends there, and the level of deception here is honestly impressive in the worst possible way. 4 months of fake work stories, fictional co-workers, and elaborate scheduling lies just to avoid admitting he got laid off. Michael created an entire alternate reality rather than having one honest conversation with his fiancée. The fact that he's still framing this as protection rather than betrayal shows he doesn't understand the gravity of what he's done to their relationship. Let's transition into our next story about family dynamics and the disturbing comparisons some people make. My girlfriend keeps comparing me to her brother-in-law. She says he's the gold standard of men. I've been dating Sarah for about 1 year and 3 months, and her sister Emma got married about 8 months ago to this guy named David. David seems like a decent enough guy from what I can tell, but according to Sarah, he's basically the perfect man who ever walked the earth. At first, I thought it was sweet that Sarah was happy her sister had found someone good. David does seem to treat Emma well, and he's successful in his career as an engineer. He's also pretty handy around the house and helps out a lot with their home renovation projects. But somewhere along the way, Sarah's admiration for David turned into constant comparisons between him and me. It started small with comments like, "David always opens car doors for Emma," or "David surprised Emma with flowers just because." I tried to take these as gentle hints about things she might appreciate, so I started being more attentive with those kinds of gestures. The comments escalated though. Now Sarah brings up David in almost every conversation we have about our relationship or our future. When we talk about finances, she mentions how David has already started a college fund for kids they don't even have yet. When we're discussing household chores, she points out how David does all the cooking because he's better at it than Emma. Last week we were having dinner at my apartment when Sarah noticed I'd forgotten to take out the trash before the garbage truck came. Instead of just mentioning it, she sighed and said, "David would never forget something like that. He has a whole system for keeping track of household responsibilities." I asked Sarah if she'd rather be dating David instead of me, and she got defensive. She said she was just pointing out good qualities that successful men have, and that I shouldn't be threatened by her wanting me to improve myself. She said David sets a good example of what mature relationships look like. The breaking point came during Emma and David's housewarming party last weekend. Sarah spent the entire evening following David around, asking him about his investment strategies, his workout routine, and his career advancement plans. She was taking notes on her phone like she was conducting an interview. At one point, Sarah announced to a group of people that David was her template for what she wanted in a long-term partner. She said he'd shown her what she should expect from a relationship, and that she was grateful to have such a clear example to follow. I was standing right next to her when she said this, and everyone looked uncomfortable. Emma seemed embarrassed, and David looked like he wanted to disappear. I felt completely humiliated being discussed like I was a defective product that needed to be returned and exchanged for the David model. On the drive home, Sarah said she didn't understand why I was being so quiet and moody. When I explained that being constantly compared to her brother-in-law was hurtful and demeaning, she said I was being insecure and that healthy competition was good for relationships. Sarah told me that instead of getting upset about the comparisons, I should use David as motivation to become a better version of myself. She said she was trying to help me reach my potential, and that most women would appreciate having such clear guidance about what their partner could improve. I pointed out that I'd never once compared her to other women, or suggested she needed to model herself after someone else's girlfriend. Sarah said that was different, because women don't need as much direction as men do when it comes to relationships, and that she was naturally more emotionally intelligent than I was. When I asked if she actually wanted to be with me or if she was just waiting for me to transform into David, Sarah said she loved me, but that love meant wanting your partner to grow and improve. She said settling for less than what David and Emma have would be selling ourselves short. The conversation ended with Sarah saying she hoped I'd start taking her feedback more seriously, instead of getting defensive every time she tried to help me become more like the kind of man she deserved. That story's finished. The way Sarah has turned her brother-in-law into some kind of relationship deity is absolutely insane. She's basically telling OP he's a placeholder until he can successfully cosplay as another man. Nobody should have to live up to someone else's sibling-in-law as a relationship requirement. This isn't about improvement. It's about Sarah being in love with an idea of a person rather than the actual person she's dating. Moving into our next story about priorities that will make you question some people's memory capabilities. My boyfriend forgot our anniversary again, but this time he remembered his co-worker's birthday. I've been with Ryan for 2.5 years, and our anniversary is October 15th. It's not a random date that's hard to remember, because it's also the day we first said, "I love you" to each other, which happened exactly 6 months after our first date. The date has significance beyond just being when we started dating. Last year, Ryan completely forgot our 1-year anniversary. I had to remind him the next day when I mentioned going somewhere special to celebrate. He felt terrible and promised he'd never forget such an important date again. He said he'd put it in his phone calendar with multiple reminders so it would never happen again. This year, I didn't want to assume he'd remember, but I also didn't want to have to remind him again like I was his mother managing his social calendar. I dropped a few subtle hints in the weeks leading up to October 15th, mentioning how excited I was for our special day and asking if he'd made any plans yet. Ryan seemed distracted whenever I brought up anniversary plans. He'd nod and say he was working on something, but he never gave me any concrete details about what we might do to celebrate. I started getting nervous that he'd forgotten again, but I told myself to have faith that he'd learned from last year's mistake. October 15th came and went with absolutely no acknowledgement from Ryan that it was our anniversary. We spent the evening watching TV like any other night, and he didn't mention the significance of the date once. I kept waiting for him to surprise me with dinner reservations or even just a card, but nothing happened. The next morning, I asked Ryan if he knew what yesterday had been. He looked confused for a moment, then his face showed recognition and horror as he realised what he'd forgotten. He started apologising profusely and saying he'd been so busy with work that the date had completely slipped his mind. I was hurt but tried to be understanding since everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Ryan promised to make it up to me over the weekend with a special celebration. He said he'd planned something romantic to show me how much our relationship meant to him. 2 days later, on October 17th, I watched Ryan spend his entire morning preparing for his co-worker Jessica's birthday. He'd bought her an expensive bottle of wine, a thoughtful card, and had coordinated with other co-workers to decorate her office with balloons and flowers. Ryan left early for work that day to set up Jessica's birthday surprise, and he came home that evening talking excitedly about how happy she'd been and how much she'd loved all the decorations. He showed me photos of the office celebration and seemed genuinely proud of how well the surprise had turned out. I couldn't help but point out the irony that he'd remembered Jessica's birthday perfectly and put significant time and effort into celebrating her, while completely forgetting our anniversary just 2 days earlier. Ryan said that was completely different because Jessica's birthday was marked on the office calendar, and he'd had weeks of reminders from other co-workers. I asked why he couldn't put the same energy into remembering our anniversary that he put into remembering his co-worker's birthday. Ryan said work relationships require more attention to social niceties, and that I should understand he doesn't need to perform the same level of thoughtfulness with me because we're comfortable with each other. When I pointed out that comfortable doesn't mean unimportant, Ryan got defensive. He said he shouldn't be compared to how he treats co-workers because our relationship was more secure and didn't require the same kind of maintenance as professional relationships. I tried to explain that it wasn't about comparison. It was about the fact that he clearly had the capacity to remember important dates and plan thoughtful celebrations when he wanted to. Ryan said I was making too big a deal out of calendar management and that the love between us shouldn't be measured by his ability to remember arbitrary dates. The conversation escalated when I pointed out that he'd now forgotten our anniversary 2 years in a row, which suggested a pattern rather than an innocent mistake. Ryan said I was keeping score in an unhealthy way and that holding grudges about minor forgetfulness was toxic for our relationship. He then suggested that maybe we should just stop celebrating anniversaries altogether since they seem to cause more stress than joy. Ryan said focusing on daily appreciation was more important than making a big deal out of one specific date every year. I told Ryan that it wasn't about the date itself, it was about feeling like a priority in his life. The fact that he could remember and celebrate his co-worker's birthday while forgetting our relationship milestone made me feel less important than someone he works with. Ryan said I was being dramatic and that comparing our romantic relationship to his professional obligations wasn't fair. He said he loved me more than anyone else in his life and that should be enough without requiring him to perform love through calendar reminders and scheduled celebrations. That story ends there. The mental gymnastics here are Olympic level. He can coordinate office decorations and buy thoughtful gifts for a co-worker, but somehow can't manage to remember the anniversary of his own relationship 2 years running. Ryan's basically saying his girlfriend deserves less effort than his work colleagues because their relationship is secure. That's not how love works, buddy. Let's move to our next story about financial arrangements that reveal some interesting double standards. My girlfriend wants me to pay all the rent because I make more, but she refuses to contribute anything to bills. I've been living with my girlfriend Monica for about 4 months now. We moved in together after dating for a year, and initially we agreed to split all expenses 50-50 since we both have full-time jobs. Monica works as a receptionist at a dental office, and I work in IT support. I make about 60% more than she does, but her salary is still enough to cover half of our shared expenses comfortably. When we first started apartment hunting, we looked at places that would be affordable for both of us based on splitting everything equally. We found a nice 2-bedroom place where each of us would pay about 30% of our respective incomes toward rent and utilities, which seemed reasonable for both our budgets. For the first 2 months, Monica paid her half of everything on time without any complaints. We split rent, utilities, groceries, and household supplies exactly down the middle. I thought our financial arrangement was working well, and I appreciated that we were both contributing equally to our shared life. About 6 weeks ago, Monica started making comments about how unfair it was that I had more disposable income than she did after paying our shared expenses. She'd point out that I could afford to buy things for myself while she had to budget more carefully, and she seemed resentful about the income difference between us. Monica began suggesting that a more equitable arrangement would be for us to pay proportional amounts based on our salaries rather than splitting everything 50-50. She said that since I made more money, I should pay a larger percentage of our shared costs so that we'd both have similar amounts left over for personal spending. I wasn't necessarily opposed to adjusting our financial arrangement, but I wanted to make sure any changes were fair and sustainable. I suggested we could split rent and utilities proportionally while continuing to split groceries and household supplies evenly, since those costs were more directly related to individual consumption. Monica rejected this compromise and said she wanted me to pay all the rent and utilities since I was the higher earner. She said this would free up her income to contribute to savings and personal expenses, and that it would make our relationship more balanced overall. I pointed out that if I paid all the housing costs, Monica should contribute more to other expenses like groceries, household supplies, and entertainment costs. Monica disagreed and said that since I'd be paying rent anyway if I lived alone, taking on our full housing costs shouldn't require any additional contribution from her. When I asked what Monica would be contributing to our shared expenses if I paid all the rent and utilities, she said she'd handle groceries occasionally and buy household supplies when needed. She seemed to think this would be an equal exchange for me, covering about 70% of our total monthly expenses. I tried to explain that having me pay all the fixed costs while she handled variable expenses would result in me paying significantly more than her every month. Monica said that was the point of proportional contributions and that focusing on dollar amounts rather than percentages was selfish. The conversation took a bizarre turn when Monica said she'd been talking to her friends about our financial arrangement, and they'd all agreed that the higher earner should cover housing costs in live-in relationships. She said most couples naturally fall into this pattern, and that my resistance to it showed a lack of commitment to our partnership. I asked Monica how she'd feel if the situation were reversed and she was the higher earner being expected to cover all the major expenses. She said that would be different because women naturally contribute more emotional labour to relationships, so men should contribute more financial labour to balance things out. Monica then revealed that she'd already stopped putting money aside for rent because she'd assumed I'd agree to her proposal. She said she'd been using her rent money for other expenses and didn't have enough saved to pay her half of next month's rent. I was shocked that Monica had unilaterally decided to stop saving for rent without confirming our new arrangement. She said she'd been confident I'd see reason and agree to pay housing costs myself, and that holding back her rent money had been a way of forcing the conversation about our finances. When I told Monica she needed to pay her agreed upon half of next month's rent, she got angry and accused me of being controlling and financially abusive. She said that men who refuse to support their girlfriends are selfish, and that I was proving I didn't really love her. Monica has spent the past week giving me the silent treatment and sleeping in our guest room. She's been posting on social media about gold digger accusations and how women deserve financial security in relationships. Her friends have been commenting supportively about how she deserves a man who can provide for her properly. Yesterday, Monica announced that she'd found a part-time weekend job to supplement her income, but that the money would go toward her personal goals rather than our shared expenses. She said if I wanted her to contribute more financially, I needed to step up and cover the basic costs of our life together first. The whole situation has become this weird standoff, where Monica refuses to pay her share of bills, but also refuses to move out or find alternative arrangements. She's treating our shared apartment like she's entitled to live there, regardless of her financial contribution. That story ends there. Monica basically decided unilaterally to stop paying rent and then tried to gaslight OP into thinking he was financially abusive for expecting her to honour their original agreement. The manipulation of spending her rent money on other things to force his hand is calculated and dishonest. She wants all the benefits of living together with none of the financial responsibility, then plays victim when called out. Moving along to our next story about modern technology being used for some pretty old-fashioned betrayal. I found out my partner was using my Netflix to watch shows with someone else. They were literally having date nights online. I've been with Sam for about 8 months and we don't live together yet, but we share passwords for various streaming services. I have Netflix and Hulu, Sam has Disney Plus and HBO Max, and we just use each other's accounts freely. It seemed like a practical arrangement that saved us both money while letting us watch whatever we wanted. Last month, I noticed that my Netflix viewing history had shows and movies in it that I'd never watched. At first I figured maybe Sam had been using my account to catch up on series I wasn't interested in, which was totally fine since that was the whole point of sharing passwords. But the viewing history was weird because it showed someone watching romantic comedies and drama series that didn't seem like Sam's usual preferences. Sam typically watches action movies and documentaries, not the kind of emotional, relationship-focused content that was showing up in my recently watched list. I mentioned it casually to Sam, just asking if they'd been exploring different genres lately. Sam said they'd been branching out and trying new types of shows, and that sharing my account had introduced them to content they wouldn't normally choose. The explanation seemed reasonable, but I started paying more attention to the viewing patterns on my account. I noticed that the romantic movies and relationship dramas were always watched during times when Sam claimed to be busy with work or other obligations. What really caught my attention was that these shows were being watched in real time, not binge-watched like you'd expect if someone was just exploring new content. The viewing history showed consistent watching patterns, like someone was keeping up with ongoing series week by week. I decided to check the account details more carefully and discovered something that made my stomach drop. The viewing activity showed that these shows were being watched simultaneously on 2 different devices, suggesting that 2 people were watching together and syncing their viewing experience. Netflix has this feature where you can see which device is streaming what content, and I could see that during these romantic movie sessions, there were 2 active streams running the same content at exactly the same times. Someone was having coordinated movie nights using my account. I confronted Sam about the dual device streaming, and at first they tried to say they'd been watching on their laptop and phone simultaneously, maybe starting something on one device and finishing on another. but the timestamps showed both devices streaming the entire duration of movies at the same time. Eventually, Sam admitted that they'd been watching movies and shows with their co-worker Riley. They said it had started innocently when Riley mentioned wanting to see a particular series, and Sam had offered to share my Netflix password so Riley could watch it. Sam explained that they'd begun having virtual movie nights where they'd video chat while watching the same content together. They said it was just friendly entertainment and a way to socialise during boring weeknights when they didn't have other plans. I asked why Sam hadn't mentioned these virtual dates with Riley, especially since they were using my streaming account to facilitate them. Sam said they hadn't thought it was worth mentioning because it was just casual hanging out, not anything romantic or inappropriate. When I pointed out that sharing romantic movies over video chat sounded pretty date-like, Sam got defensive. They said I was being possessive and that platonic friends watch movies together all the time. They accused me of trying to control their friendships and social activities. I explained that I wasn't trying to control anything, but that I felt uncomfortable with my Netflix account being used for what sounded like intimate bonding experiences with someone else. Sam said that was ridiculous because streaming services weren't inherently romantic. The conversation revealed that these virtual movie nights had been happening multiple times per week for over a month. Sam and Riley had developed a whole routine where they'd coordinate their schedules, choose movies together, and spend hours chatting while watching content on my account. Sam also admitted that the movie choices had been Riley's preferences, not their own exploration of new genres like they'd originally claimed. They'd been letting Riley essentially control the content selection for their shared viewing experiences. When I asked if I could join one of these virtual movie nights, Sam said that would be weird because Riley didn't know me, and it would change the dynamic they'd established. They said 3 people watching together would be awkward, and that I was trying to insert myself into their friendship. I pointed out that it was actually my streaming account being used for these friendship activities, which meant I had some say in how it was being utilised. Sam said that was petty and that sharing passwords meant trusting each other to use services responsibly. The argument escalated when Sam accused me of being jealous of their friendship with Riley and trying to sabotage their social connections. They said healthy relationships require partners to have independent friendships and activities. I tried to explain that the issue wasn't their friendship with Riley, but the fact that they'd been essentially dating someone else, using my Netflix account while lying to me about their viewing habits. Sam said calling it dating was a huge exaggeration and that I was being paranoid about normal social interactions. That story wraps up there. Using someone's streaming account for regular virtual dates while lying about it is such a bizarre form of modern betrayal. Sam created an intimate routine with another person using OP's resources and then tried to gaslight them about it being normal friendship behaviour. The fact that OP couldn't even join these movie nights on their own accounts says everything about what was really happening. Let's dive into our next story about declarations of love that come with some pretty devastating timing. My boyfriend told me he loved me right before breaking up with me. He said he didn't want to lie, but he wasn't happy. This happened 3 days ago, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what's happened. Jake and I had been together for about 7 months, and everything seemed to be going really well between us. We'd been talking about getting more serious, maybe moving in together next year, and I felt like we were building something real. Last Friday night, we were having dinner at this little Italian place we'd been to a few times before. The conversation was flowing normally. We were laughing about something that happened at my work, and Jake seemed relaxed and happy. Nothing felt off or unusual about the evening. After we finished eating, Jake got this serious look on his face and said he had something important to tell me. My heart started racing because I thought maybe he was going to tell me he loved me for the first time. We'd been dancing around those words for weeks, and I'd been waiting for the right moment to say them myself. Jake took my hand across the table and looked directly into my eyes. He said, "I need to tell you that I love you. I really do love you, and I don't want to lie about that. I felt this rush of happiness and started to smile, but then he kept talking. He said, but I also need to tell you that I'm not happy in this relationship, and I think we need to break up. I literally thought I'd misheard him at first. How do you tell someone you love them and break up with them in the same breath? I asked Jake to explain what he meant, and he said he'd been struggling with his feelings for weeks. He said he genuinely loved me as a person and cared about my well-being, but that he wasn't happy with where our relationship was going and didn't think we were compatible long-term. Jake explained that he'd been trying to force himself to be more invested in our future together, but that he kept feeling like something was missing. He said he didn't want to keep pretending to be more committed than he actually was, and that it wouldn't be fair to either of us to continue. When I asked why he was telling me he loved me if he was breaking wanted up with me, Jake said he me to know that his feelings were real, even though he couldn't be in a relationship with me anymore. He said he thought it would be worse to lie and pretend he didn't have feelings for me just to make the breakup easier. I pointed out that telling someone you love them while dumping them was probably more confusing and hurtful than just ending things without the love declaration. Jake said he'd been wrestling with whether to say it or not, but that he felt like he owed me honesty about his emotions. The whole conversation was surreal. Jake kept emphasizing how much he cared about me and how difficult this decision was for him, while simultaneously explaining why he couldn't be with me anymore. He said he hoped we could stay friends because our connection was too valuable to lose completely. I asked Jake if there was someone else, or if he'd been planning this breakup for a while. He said there wasn't anyone else, but that he'd been having doubts about our compatibility for about a month. He said he'd been hoping the feelings would change, but they hadn't. When I pressed him about what specifically wasn't working in our relationship, Jake got vague. He said it wasn't anything I'd done wrong, but that he just didn't feel the spark he thought he should feel with someone he was planning a future with. Jake said he'd rather end things while we still had good feelings toward each other than wait until resentment built up and ruined even the positive aspects of what we'd shared. He kept saying he loved me too much to string me along when he knew he wasn't fully committed. The conversation ended with Jake paying for dinner and walking me to my car. He hugged me and said again that he loved me and hoped I'd understand his decision eventually. Then he got in his car and drove away, leaving me sitting in the restaurant parking lot, completely stunned. I've been replaying that night over and over, trying to understand how someone can love you enough to be honest about it, but not enough to actually stay with you. Jake's been texting me, asking if I'm okay and saying he hopes we can talk soon about being friends. That story ends there. The emotional whiplash of getting an I love you and a breakup in the same sentence is absolutely brutal. Jake thought he was being noble by being honest about his feelings, but really, he just made the whole thing more painfully confusing. You can't soften the blow of rejection by telling someone you love them while you're rejecting them. Sometimes honesty without timing is just cruelty wrapped in good intentions. Moving into our next story about social media expectations that reveal some interesting insecurity patterns. My girlfriend says I don't post enough about her online. She accused me of hiding our relationship. I've been with Ashley for about 10 months now, and we have what I thought was a pretty solid relationship. We spend a lot of time together. She's met my family and friends, and I've integrated her into pretty much every aspect of my social life. Ashley is important to me, and I make sure she knows it through my actions and words on a daily basis. The problem started about 3 months ago when Ashley began making comments about my social media activity. She'd notice when I posted photos from nights out with friends and point out that she wasn't tagged or mentioned, even when she hadn't been there. She started asking why I never posted couple photos of us together. I explained that I'm just not really a social media person in general. I have Instagram and Facebook accounts, but I maybe post something once a month, usually just random stuff like food or sunsets. I've never been someone who documents every aspect of my life online or feels the need to broadcast my personal business to acquaintances and strangers. Ashley said she understood that I wasn't super active on social media, but that when I did post, she should be included sometimes since we were in a serious relationship. She pointed out that I'd posted photos with friends and family members, so it wasn't like I never featured other people in my content. I started making an effort to include Ashley in my occasional posts. When we went out to dinner, I'd take a photo of us together. When we went to events, I'd make sure to get a couple shot and post it with a nice caption about having a good time with her. I thought this compromise would address her concerns, but Ashley's requests kept escalating. She wanted me to post about her more frequently, tag her in stories even when the content wasn't directly related to her, and write longer, more romantic captions about our relationship. She said my posts about her seemed obligatory rather than genuine. Ashley started comparing my social media activity to her ex-boyfriend, who apparently posted about her constantly when they were together. She said he'd share couple photos weekly, write long paragraphs about how much he loved her, and make sure everyone knew how serious their relationship was. When I pointed out that maybe her ex's constant posting hadn't been healthy if their relationship ended anyway, Ashley got defensive. She said the relationship had ended for unrelated reasons, and that his willingness to publicly celebrate their love had been one of the good things about dating him. Ashley began monitoring my social media activity obsessively. She'd notice immediately when I posted anything and would get upset if it didn't include her. She started commenting on every single post I made, even ones that had nothing to do with our relationship, like she was marking her territory. The situation escalated when Ashley accused me of hiding our relationship from people online. She said the only reason someone would avoid posting about their partner was if they were ashamed of the relationship or keeping their options open for other people. I tried to explain that not posting frequently about our relationship didn't mean I was hiding it or keeping options open. I said that anyone who actually knew me could see how committed I was to Ashley through my behaviour in real life, not through social media performance. Ashley said that in modern relationships, social media presence was part of showing commitment and respect for your partner. She said I was being naive if I thought online representation didn't matter in today's dating world. When I suggested that maybe Ashley was putting too much importance on social media validation, she accused me of dismissing her feelings and being unsupportive of her emotional needs. She said wanting your partner to publicly acknowledge your relationship was normal and healthy. The argument came to a head last week when Ashley gave me an ultimatum. She said I needed to start posting about our relationship at least twice a week, including romantic captions and couple photos, or she'd assume I wasn't serious about our future together. I told Ashley that I loved her and was committed to our relationship, but that I wasn't going to perform our love for social media followers on a scheduled basis. I said if she needed that kind of online validation to feel secure in our relationship, then maybe we had deeper compatibility issues to address. Ashley said I was being stubborn and that my refusal to post about her was proof that I didn't value our relationship enough. She's been giving me the silent treatment for 3 days now, and she started posting single girl content on her own accounts, like she's testing whether I'll react or compete for her attention online. That story ends there. Ashley's turned social media into a relationship report card, and somehow OP's actual commitment doesn't count unless it's performed for strangers on the internet. The comparison to her ex who posted constantly is telling, since that relationship obviously didn't work out. Real love doesn't need a weekly Instagram announcement to validate its existence. Let's dive into our next story about legal documents that reveal some pretty concerning priorities. My fiancé wants me to sign a prenup that favours him. It leaves me with nothing if we divorce. I've been engaged to Michael for 4 months now, and we're planning our wedding for next fall. We've been together for 3 years total, and I thought we had a good understanding about our future together and what we both wanted from marriage. Michael has always been financially minded and practical about planning for the future, which I've generally appreciated. Last week, Michael said he wanted to discuss getting a prenuptial agreement before we got married. I wasn't completely surprised by this, since Michael has significantly more assets than I do. He owns his own business, has investment properties, and inherited money from his grandparents. I work as a teacher and have some savings, but nothing close to his level of wealth. I told Michael I was open to discussing a prenup, since I understood he wanted to protect assets he'd built before our relationship. I figured we'd work with lawyers to create something fair that protected both of our interests, while acknowledging our different financial situations. Michael said he'd already had his lawyer draft a preliminary agreement for us to review. He handed me a thick document and said I should read through it and let him know if I had any questions. He seemed excited about having everything organised and legally protected. When I started reading the prenup, I was shocked by how one-sided it was. According to the document, Michael would keep all of his current assets, all future business income, and all property acquired during our marriage. I would be entitled to keep only assets I brought into the marriage, which amounted to about $15,000 in savings and my car. The agreement also specified that I wouldn't be entitled to any spousal support if we divorced, regardless of the circumstances or length of our marriage. Even if we were married for decades and I'd supported his career by managing our household, I'd leave the marriage with essentially nothing beyond what I'd entered it with. What made it even worse was that the prenup included clauses about my behaviour during the marriage. I would be required to maintain Michael's household to his standards, host business dinners when requested, and prioritise his career advancement over my own professional development. Failure to meet these expectations could void any limited protections I had in the agreement. I asked Michael if he'd actually read this document, or if his lawyer had just written something extreme as a starting point for negotiations. Michael said he'd reviewed every clause carefully, and that the agreement reflected his expectations for our marriage and divorce protection. When I pointed out that the prenup left me completely financially vulnerable, Michael said that was the point. He explained that he needed to make sure I was marrying him for love rather than money, and that having no financial incentive to divorce would ensure I was committed to making our marriage work. I tried to explain that fair financial protection was different from leaving one spouse destitute. Michael said that if I truly loved him and planned to stay married forever, then the terms of the divorce shouldn't matter anyway. Michael also revealed that the prenup included clauses about children. If we had kids and later divorced, I would get minimal child support and no custody rights to any property or investments made for the children's benefit. Michael would have complete control over educational decisions and financial planning for our hypothetical kids. When I suggested we both hire separate lawyers to negotiate more balanced terms, Michael got defensive. He said his lawyer was experienced in family law and had already created a comprehensive document. He accused me of being greedy and trying to complicate something that should be straightforward. I pointed out that any fair prenup would involve both parties having independent legal representation, and that signing something his lawyer wrote without my own advocate would be stupid. Michael said hiring two lawyers was an unnecessary expense when his attorney could represent both our interests. The conversation escalated when Michael said that my resistance to signing the prenup made him question my motivations for marrying him. He said if I had nothing to hide and truly loved him, I'd be happy to sign whatever agreement would make him feel secure. Michael has given me 2 weeks to review the document and sign it, saying that if I refuse, he'll have to reconsider whether marriage is right for us. He's been treating this like a test of my love, rather than a legal document that could affect my entire future. Yesterday, Michael mentioned that he'd already put deposits down on wedding venues and vendors, but that all the contracts were contingent on us having a signed prenup in place. He's essentially forcing me to choose between signing his one-sided agreement or losing our wedding and possibly our relationship. That story wraps up there. This isn't a prenup, it's a contract for financial servitude disguised as marriage protection. Michael wants a wife who's legally obligated to prioritise his career while having zero security if things don't work out. The fact that he's using their wedding deposits as leverage shows this was always about control, not love. Moving into our next story about friendship boundaries that get crossed in the most uncomfortable ways. I found out my partner flirted with my best friend. She told me he sent her late-night messages. I've been with Chris for about 1.5 years now, and my best friend Emma has been supportive of our relationship from the beginning. Emma and I have been friends since college, and she's always been someone I can trust completely. She's met Chris several times at parties and group hangouts, and they've always seemed to get along well in a normal, platonic way. Last weekend, Emma and I were having our usual Saturday morning coffee when she seemed unusually uncomfortable about something. She kept starting sentences and then stopping herself, like she was debating whether to tell me something. Finally, she said she had something difficult to share with me about Chris. Emma explained that Chris had been messaging her privately for the past few weeks. At first, the messages had seemed innocent enough, just friendly check-ins and comments about things they'd discussed when we were all hanging out together. She hadn't thought much of it, since we were all friends and casual communication seemed normal. But according to Emma, the messages had gradually become more personal and flirty. Chris started complimenting her appearance, asking about her dating life, and making comments about how lucky I was to have such a beautiful best friend. Emma said she'd tried to redirect the conversations back to neutral topics, but Chris kept pushing boundaries. Emma showed me screenshots of some of the messages Chris had sent her. The early ones were indeed pretty innocent, just casual conversation about work and weekend plans. But the more recent messages were definitely inappropriate for someone in a committed relationship. Chris had been texting Emma late at night, usually after midnight, asking what she was doing and whether she was alone. He'd made comments about wishing he could hang out with her one-on-one and had asked if she'd ever thought about him in a romantic way. The messages had a definitely flirty tone that crossed friendship boundaries. In one particularly uncomfortable message, Chris had told Emma that he found her more interesting and attractive than most of the women he knew, and that he sometimes wondered what it would be like to date someone like her instead of being in a serious relationship. Emma had not responded to that message. Emma said she'd been debating for days whether to tell me about Chris's messages because she didn't want to cause problems in my relationship, but that she ultimately felt I deserved to know what was happening. She said she valued our friendship too much to keep secrets that could affect my happiness. I asked Emma why she hadn't shut down Chris's inappropriate messages more directly, and she said she'd been trying to handle it diplomatically without creating drama. She'd been hoping Chris would get the hint and stop on his own, but his messages had actually become more persistent over time. Emma also revealed that Chris had asked her not to mention their private conversations to me, saying that he enjoyed having someone to talk to who understood him differently than I did. This request had made Emma even more uncomfortable and convinced her that Chris knew his behaviour was inappropriate. I was devastated and angry, but I was also grateful that Emma had been honest with me instead of hiding what was happening. I asked her if Chris had ever made any physical advances when we were all together, and she said no, that the inappropriate behaviour had been limited to private messages. That evening, I confronted Chris about the messages Emma had shown me. At first, he denied sending anything inappropriate and claimed Emma was misunderstanding his friendly communication. When I showed him the screenshots, he couldn't keep up the denial. Chris admitted to messaging Emma, but said it was harmless flirting that didn't mean anything. He said he'd been feeling bored in our relationship and that talking to Emma had been a way to feel attractive and interesting again. He claimed he never would have actually acted on any of the things he'd said. When I pointed out that flirting with my best friend behind my back was a betrayal regardless of whether he intended to act on it, Chris got defensive. He said all guys flirt occasionally and that I was overreacting to some harmless messages that hadn't led to anything physical. Chris then tried to blame Emma for the situation, saying she'd been encouraging his attention by responding to his messages instead of blocking him immediately. He claimed that if Emma had really been uncomfortable, she would have stopped engaging with him entirely. I told Chris that Emma had actually been trying to preserve both our friendship and my relationship by handling his inappropriate behaviour diplomatically. Chris said he thought Emma had enjoyed the attention and that she was only telling me about their conversations now because she felt guilty. The conversation ended with Chris promising to stop messaging Emma and saying he'd learned his lesson about appropriate boundaries. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was more sorry about getting caught than sorry about betraying my trust. That story ends right there. The fact that Chris asked Emma to keep their conversation secret shows he knew exactly what he was doing was wrong. Then trying to blame Emma for not blocking him immediately is classic deflection from someone who got caught. Emma's loyalty in telling OP about the messages probably saved her from a relationship with someone who'd eventually cheat with whoever was convenient. Let's move to our next story about public humiliation that shows how some people handle conflict. My boyfriend doesn't defend me around his friends. They make jokes at my expense and he laughs along. I've been dating Tyler for about 8 months and overall our relationship is pretty good when it's just the two of us. Tyler is funny, attentive, and we have great chemistry together. The problem arises whenever we're around his friend group, which is a tight-knit bunch of guys he's known since high school. Tyler's friends have a very sarcastic, roasting type of humour, where they constantly make fun of each other and everyone around them. At first, I thought it was just their dynamic, and that I'd get used to it once I spent more time with them. I figured the teasing was just their way of including me in their group. But over the past few months, I've realised that the jokes directed at me are different from the ones they make about each other. When they tease Tyler or the other guys, it's usually about harmless stuff like bad haircuts or embarrassing high school stories. When they target me, the comments are often about my appearance, my intelligence, or my relationship with Tyler. Last weekend at a house party, Tyler's friend Marcus made a comment about how Tyler must be settling because I was batting out of my league. Instead of defending me, Tyler laughed and made a joke about how I was lucky he had low standards. The whole group found this hilarious. Another time, when I mentioned that I was studying for my master's degree, Tyler's friend Jake said I was probably wasting my time because I didn't seem smart enough for graduate school. Tyler just smiled and changed the subject instead of standing up for me or telling his friend that comment was inappropriate. The worst incident happened 2 weeks ago when we were all watching a movie at Tyler's apartment. I made a comment about not understanding part of the plot, and Tyler's friend Ryan said I was too stupid to follow basic storylines. Tyler actually agreed with him and said I always needed things explained to me like a child. I was humiliated and hurt, but I didn't want to cause a scene in front of everyone. After his friends left, I told Tyler how uncomfortable I felt when they made mean comments about me, and he didn't defend me. Tyler said I was being too sensitive and that his friends were just joking around. Tyler explained that his friend group had always communicated through sarcasm and insults, and that getting offended by their humour would make me an outsider. He said if I wanted to fit in with his friends, I needed to develop thicker skin and learn to give as good as I got. I pointed out that there was a difference between playful teasing and genuinely mean-spirited comments about my intelligence and appearance. Tyler said his friends didn't mean anything malicious by their jokes, and that I was reading too much into harmless banter. When I asked Tyler how he'd feel if my friends constantly insulted him, and I laughed along instead of defending him, he said that would be different because guys don't get hurt by that kind of thing. He said women were naturally more emotional and took things too personally. Tyler suggested that instead of expecting him to police on building better teasing, would probably they got to know me better. His friends' behaviour, I should focus. He said once relationships with them directly become more friendly and less targeted. I tried to take Tyler's advice and engage more with his friends, but their comments only got worse. They started making jokes about how clingy I was, how I was trying too hard to fit in, and how Tyler's previous girlfriends had been more fun and easygoing than me. The breaking point came at Tyler's birthday party last month. His friends spent the entire evening making comments about my outfit, my job, and my personality, while Tyler laughed along with everything they said. When one friend suggested Tyler could do better, Tyler actually thanked him for the honest feedback. After the party, I told Tyler I felt completely disrespected and unsupported. I said that watching my boyfriend laugh while his friends insulted me was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. Tyler said I was being dramatic and that I'd ruined his birthday party by being moody and sensitive. Tyler told me that if I couldn't handle his friend's sense of humour, then maybe I wasn't the right fit for his social circle. He said his friends had been in his life for over a decade, and he wasn't going to change those relationships to accommodate my insecurities. I asked Tyler if he actually agreed with his friend's assessment of me, or if he was just going along with their jokes to avoid conflict. Tyler said it didn't matter what he thought, because the comments were just humour and not meant to be taken seriously. The conversation ended with Tyler saying I needed to decide whether I could accept his friends as part of our relationship, or whether this was a deal breaker for me. He made it clear that he wasn't going to start defending me or asking his friends to change their behaviour. That story ends there. Tyler's basically chosen his friend's entertainment over his girlfriend's dignity, and he's trying to frame basic respect as being too sensitive. A partner who won't defend you when people attack your character, and intelligence doesn't actually respect you themselves. The fact that he thanked his friend for saying he could do better shows exactly where his loyalties lie. Moving to our next story about accountability that takes a sharp left turn into manipulation territory. My girlfriend told me she cheated, but says it was my fault. She claims I wasn't giving her enough attention. I've been with Jessica for almost 2 years, and I thought we had a strong, committed relationship. We've talked about moving in together and have been making long-term plans for our future. Jessica has always been a little high maintenance emotionally, but I've tried to be attentive and supportive of her needs. Last Friday, Jessica asked if we could have a serious conversation about our relationship. She seemed nervous and said she had something important to confess that had been weighing on her conscience. I was worried she was going to break up with me or tell me about some major problem in her life. Jessica told me that she'd cheated on me 3 weeks ago with a guy she met at her co-worker's birthday party. She said they'd been drinking and talking, and one thing led to another. She claimed it was a one-time mistake that she immediately regretted and had been feeling guilty about ever since. I was devastated and asked Jessica why she'd cheated if she claimed to love me and want a future together. That's when the conversation took a turn I wasn't expecting. Jessica said that while she took responsibility for her actions, she felt like I'd contributed to the situation by not meeting her emotional needs. Jessica explained that she'd been feeling neglected in our relationship for months. She said I'd been prioritizing work and my hobbies over spending quality time with her, and that she'd felt lonely and unappreciated. She claimed the attention she received from the other guy had filled a void I'd created. I asked Jessica to give me specific examples of how I'd been neglecting her, because I genuinely thought I'd been a caring and attentive boyfriend. Jessica said I didn't text her enough during work hours, that I didn't plan enough romantic surprises, and that I sometimes chose to hang out with friends instead of spending every free moment with her. Jessica also said that I didn't compliment her appearance frequently enough, and that she'd started doubting whether I still found her attractive. She claimed that the guy at the party had made her feel beautiful and desired in a way I hadn't been doing lately. When I pointed out that feeling neglected didn't justify cheating and that there were other ways to address relationship problems, Jessica got defensive. She said I was missing the point and that if I'd been a better boyfriend, she never would have been vulnerable to someone else's attention in the first place. Jessica said she wasn't trying to blame me entirely, but that relationships require two people and that my emotional unavailability had created the conditions that led to her mistake. She said she hoped I could understand her perspective and work with her to fix the underlying problems in our relationship. I told Jessica that while I was willing to discuss ways to improve our communication and connection, I couldn't accept that my behaviour had caused her to cheat. I said that if she was unhappy with our relationship, she should have talked to me about it instead of seeking attention from someone else. Jessica accused me of being defensive and unwilling to take accountability for my role in our relationship problems. She said that healthy couples work together to understand how they both contribute to conflicts, and that my refusal to examine my behaviour showed I wasn't mature enough for a serious relationship. The conversation escalated when Jessica said that maybe the cheating had been a good thing because it forced us to confront issues we'd been ignoring. She said that if I could learn from this experience and become more attentive, our relationship could actually become stronger than it was before. I asked Jessica if she'd told the guy she was in a relationship before they hooked up, and she admitted that she'd presented herself as single. She said she'd been feeling so disconnected from me that night that it had felt true in the moment. When I pressed her about whether this was really a one-time mistake or if there had been other instances of cheating, Jessica got angry. She said I was being paranoid and that questioning her honesty proved I didn't trust her enough to work through this together. Jessica then revealed that she'd been in contact with the guy since their hookup, but claimed it was only to make sure he understood it had been a mistake and wouldn't happen again. She said she'd had to let him down gently because he'd been interested in seeing her again. I told Jessica that staying in contact with someone she'd cheated with seemed like she was keeping her options open rather than trying to repair our relationship. Jessica said I was being controlling and that she was just trying to handle the situation maturely. The conversation ended with Jessica saying she'd been brave enough to confess her mistake, and that now it was my turn to step up and address the relationship issues that had led to this crisis. She said if I couldn't forgive her and work on being a better partner, then maybe we weren't meant to be together. Over the past week, Jessica has been treating me like I'm the one who needs to prove my commitment to saving our relationship. She's been giving me articles about how to be more romantic and attentive, while acting like her cheating was just a symptom of my inadequacy as a boyfriend. Yesterday, Jessica suggested we should go to couples therapy so I could learn better communication skills and understand how to meet her emotional needs. She said she was willing to work on our relationship, but that I needed professional help to become the partner she deserved. That story ends there. Jessica's managed to cheat and then flip the script so that OP is somehow the one who needs to prove himself worthy of staying with her. She's turned her betrayal into a teaching moment about his inadequacy as a boyfriend. The ongoing contact with the guy she cheated with while demanding OP become more attentive is manipulative on a whole different level. Let's dive into our next story about security issues that reveal some interesting priorities. My partner's ex still has a key to his apartment, and he refuses to change the locks. I've been dating Marcus for about 6 months now, and we're at the point where I spend most weekends at his place. Marcus has a nice, one-bedroom apartment that he's been living in for about 2 years, and I've always felt comfortable there until recently. 3 weeks ago, I was at Marcus's place on a Sunday morning while he was out getting coffee and bagels for breakfast. I was still in bed when I heard the front door open and someone walking around the apartment. I assumed Marcus had come back early, but when I called out to him, a woman's voice responded instead. I quickly put on Marcus's robe and went to see who was in the apartment. There was a woman I'd never met before, standing in the kitchen, looking through the refrigerator like she lived there. She seemed just as surprised to see me as I was to see her. The woman introduced herself as Sarah, Marcus's ex-girlfriend. She explained that she'd stopped by to pick up some mail that was still being delivered to Marcus's address and to grab a few items she'd left behind when they broke up. She said she still had a key from when they'd lived together. I was confused because Marcus had never mentioned that his ex had a key to his apartment or that she still came by occasionally. Sarah seemed to realise this and said that maybe Marcus had forgotten to mention their arrangement since it was such a casual thing. When Marcus got back with breakfast, he seemed flustered to find Sarah and me standing awkwardly in his kitchen. Sarah explained why she was there, and Marcus nodded like this was completely normal. He didn't seem surprised to find his ex-girlfriend in his apartment while his current girlfriend was there. After Sarah left, I asked Marcus about the key situation. He explained that Sarah had lived with him for about 8 months before they broke up a year ago, and that she'd kept her key for practical reasons. She occasionally needed to pick up mail or retrieve belongings she'd forgotten, and giving her continued access was easier than coordinating schedules every time. I asked Marcus if he thought it was appropriate for his ex to have unlimited access to his apartment, especially now that he was in a new relationship. Marcus said it wasn't a big deal because Sarah was trustworthy and they'd ended things amicably. He said changing the locks would be expensive and unnecessary. I pointed out that I felt uncomfortable knowing that his ex could walk into his apartment anytime she wanted, potentially when we were together or when I was there alone. Marcus said I was being paranoid and that Sarah would never abuse her access to his place. When I suggested that Marcus could simply ask Sarah to return the key and change the locks for security reasons, he got defensive. He said Sarah had legitimate reasons for needing access occasionally, and that asking for the key back would create unnecessary drama with someone he was trying to maintain a friendship with. Marcus also revealed that Sarah still received mail at his address and used his apartment as her backup address for certain accounts and services. He said it would be a hassle for her to change everything over to her new address, and that he didn't mind helping her out during her transition period. I asked Marcus how long this transition period was supposed to last, since they'd been broken up for a year already. Marcus said he hadn't really thought about it, and that there wasn't any rush to change their arrangement since it wasn't causing any problems. The conversation took a strange turn when Marcus said that he appreciated having someone who could check on his apartment when he travelled for work or went out of town for extended periods. He said Sarah had been watering his plants and collecting his mail during his business trips, which was convenient for him. I pointed out that I could easily take care of those responsibilities now that we were dating seriously, and that relying on his ex for apartment management seemed inappropriate. Marcus said he didn't want to burden me with tasks that Sarah was already handling efficiently. When I pressed Marcus about what would happen if I needed to use his apartment key when he wasn't home, he said I should just text him first to make sure Sarah wasn't planning to stop by. I asked why I needed to coordinate with his ex-girlfriend to access my boyfriend's apartment. Marcus said I was making the situation more complicated than it needed to be. He insisted that Sarah was just a friend now who happened to have practical reasons for needing occasional access to his place, and that my jealousy was creating problems where none existed. The argument escalated when I suggested that maybe Marcus enjoyed having his ex still tied to his life through the key arrangement. Marcus accused me of being insecure and trying to control his friendships with people from his past. Last week, Sarah used her key to enter Marcus's apartment while we were both there watching a movie. She said she'd forgotten we might be there and just needed to grab something quickly. She stayed for about 20 minutes, chatting with Marcus about their mutual friends and inside jokes I didn't understand. After Sarah left, I told Marcus that I was done with the key situation and that he needed to choose between maintaining this arrangement with his ex or continuing our relationship. Marcus said I was giving him an unreasonable ultimatum and that mature adults should be able to handle complex friendship dynamics. That story wraps up there. Marcus is basically running a timeshare with his ex-girlfriend while trying to convince his current girlfriend that it's normal. The fact that Sarah still gets mail there and waters his plants shows this isn't about convenience, it's about maintaining connection. No new partner should have to coordinate with an ex just to access their boyfriend's apartment. Moving to our next story about age deception that reveals some interesting timeline issues. I found out my boyfriend lied about his age. He said he was 28, he's actually 33. I've been dating Alex for about 7 months now, and I thought I knew all the basic facts about him. We met on a dating app where his profile said he was 28, just 2 years older than me. Age wasn't a huge factor in my decision to match with him, but I appreciated that we were in similar life stages and could relate to each other's experiences. Alex has always seemed mature for his supposed age, which I attributed to having a good job in finance and being focused on his career goals. He owns his own condo, has his finances organised, and generally seems more settled than other guys I've dated who were around the same age. Last weekend, we were at a bar with some of Alex's co-workers for a colleague's promotion celebration. I'd met a few of these people before, but this was the first time I'd spent an extended evening socialising with his work friends as a group. During the evening, Alex's co-worker, Jennifer, made a comment about how Alex was getting close to the big 4-0 and should start thinking about settling down soon. I laughed and said she was jumping the gun, since Alex wouldn't turn 30 for another year and a half. Jennifer looked confused and said she thought Alex had just turned 33 last month. Another co-worker chimed in saying they'd all gone out for Alex's 33rd birthday celebration at the beginning of October. I felt my stomach drop as I realised there was a major discrepancy in the information I'd been given. I tried to play it off casually, saying I must have misheard Alex when he'd told me his age, but internally I was reeling from the possibility that my boyfriend had been lying about something so basic and fundamental for our entire relationship. On the drive home, I asked Alex directly how old he was. He seemed nervous and asked why I was bringing it up. I told him about the confusion with his co-workers, and Alex went quiet for a long moment before admitting that he was actually 33, not 28. Alex explained that he'd started lying about his age on dating apps because he'd been having trouble matching with women in their 20s when his real age was visible. He said once he changed his age to 28, he got significantly more matches and dates. I asked Alex why he'd continued the lie after we'd started dating seriously and talking about a future together. Alex said he'd been planning to tell me the truth eventually, but that as time went on, it became harder to find the right moment to confess. Alex claimed that our age difference wasn't really significant enough to matter, and that lying about being 5 years younger was a harmless deception that didn't affect our relationship compatibility. He said he'd been worried I'd break up with him over something superficial if I knew his real age from the beginning. When I pointed out that lying for 7 months about basic biographical information was a major trust violation, Alex got defensive. He said everyone embellishes things on dating apps and that his age lie was no different from women using heavily filtered photos or listing their ideal weight instead of their actual weight. I told Alex that there was a huge difference between flattering photos and completely fabricating your birth year. I said that lying about his age meant I'd been making decisions about our relationship based on false information about who he was. Alex revealed that the lie had created complications beyond just our relationship. He'd had to keep track of fake milestone birthdays, make up stories about his college graduation year, and avoid mentioning experiences that would reveal his actual age. He'd been living a complex web of deception for months. The conversation got worse when Alex admitted that he'd lied about his age to other people in his life, not just on dating apps. He'd been telling new friends and acquaintances that he was younger than his actual age because he felt like 33 sounded old and limited his social opportunities. I asked Alex what other biographical details he might have lied about, and he insisted that his age was the only major deception. But I found myself questioning everything he'd told me about his background, his experiences, and his timeline of life events. Alex begged me to forgive him and said that his feelings for me were completely genuine, even if his age wasn't. He said he'd learned his lesson about honesty and would never lie to me about anything again. He promised to tell his workers about his real age eventually, but first he wanted to make sure our relationship was solid enough to handle the revelation. When I asked how many other people in Alex's life believed he was 28 instead of 33, he admitted that pretty much everyone he'd met in the past 2 years had been told the fake age. He said he'd gotten so used to lying about it, his real age was, that sometimes he almost forgot what more we talked. The more I realised how elaborate this deception had been. Alex had been calculating fake graduation dates, and avoiding conversations in stories about his career timeline that might reveal inconsated age. He'd essentially Ostenses in his fabric created an alternate version of his life history. I told Alex I needed time I could trust someone, figure out whether to process this revelation, and who'd maintained such a fundamental lie for our entire relationship. Alex said he understood my anger, but hoped I could see past one mistake to focus on how compatible we were in every other way. That story ends there, and honestly, lying about your age for 7 months isn't a harmless dating app fib anymore. It's sustained fact that he held identity fraud. They to co-workers and friends too, shows this wasn't about impressing one person. It was about living as a completely different version of himself. You can't build trust with someone who's been performing a fake life timeline since day one. Our next story deals with friendship double standards that'll make you question some people's logic. My girlfriend says I shouldn't have male friends, but she has a dozen guy friends she texts daily. I've been with Rachel for about 10 months now, and we generally get along really well. She's smart, funny, and we have great chemistry together. The only ongoing source of conflict in our relationship has been around friendships with people of the opposite sex, but not in the way you might expect. About 3 months into our relationship, Rachel started expressing discomfort about my female friends. She said she didn't understand why guys needed to be friends with women when they were in committed relationships, and that maintaining those friendships showed a lack of respect for our relationship. I have 3 close female friends from college and work who I've known for years. These are platonic friendships, with no romantic history or underlying tension. Just people I genuinely enjoy spending time with. I've never hidden these friendships from Rachel, and I've invited her to hang out with us multiple times. Rachel said she didn't want to meet my female friends because it would make her uncomfortable, and she asked me to stop spending one-on-one time with them. She said that even if the friendships were innocent, other people might get the wrong idea about my availability and respect for our relationship. I agreed to include Rachel in any group activities with my female friends and to avoid one-on-one hangouts that might make her feel insecure. I thought this was a reasonable compromise that respected her feelings while maintaining important friendships. But Rachel's restrictions kept escalating. She asked me to stop texting my female friends, except for work-related communications. Then she said she didn't want me liking or commenting on their social media posts because it looked too friendly and familiar. Eventually, Rachel suggested that I should gradually distance myself from my female friends entirely. She said that truly committed partners prioritize their relationship over friendships that could potentially cause problems, and that my resistance to cutting contact showed I valued other women more than her feelings. Here's where the hypocrisy becomes obvious. While Rachel was demanding that I eliminate female friends from my life, she maintained close friendships with at least a dozen men. She texted male friends throughout the day, hung out with them one-on-one regularly, and even had a few guy friends who she'd previously dated or hooked up with. When I pointed out this double standard, Rachel said it was completely different because she was naturally better at maintaining appropriate boundaries with male friends. She claimed that men and women approach opposite-sex friendships differently, and that she could trust herself in ways I couldn't be trusted. Rachel explained that women are more emotionally intelligent and less likely to let friendships cross into inappropriate territory. She said my male brain made me more susceptible to developing feelings for female friends, even if I didn't realize it was happening. I asked Rachel how she'd feel if I demanded she stop texting her male friends and cut contact with guys she'd previously been involved with. Rachel said that would be different because her male friend-to-her supportships were essential system, and that I was trying to isolate her socially. The conversation got heated when Rachel accused me of trying to deflect attention from my own inappropriate friendships by attacking hers. She said that instead of focusing on her male friends, I should be examining why I was so resistant to prioritizing our relationship over other women. Rachel also revealed that several of her male friends had expressed romantic interest in her over the years, but that she'd handled those situations maturely by maintaining clear boundaries. She said this proved she could be trusted with opposite-sex friendships in ways I couldn't. When I pointed out that having male friends who were attracted to her seemed more problematic than my platonic female friendships, Rachel got defensive. She said she couldn't control other people's feelings, only her own actions, and that she'd never encouraged inappropriate attention from her male friends. The argument escalated when Rachel said that if I truly loved her, I'd be willing to make sacrifices to help her feel secure in our relationship. She said that choosing female friends over her comfort was a clear sign of where my priorities lay. I tried to explain that it wasn't about choosing friends over her, but about maintaining a balanced life that included both romantic and platonic relationships. Rachel said that balance was a luxury that couples couldn't afford when trust and security were at stake. Last week, Rachel gave me an ultimatum. She said I needed to decide whether I wanted to be in a committed relationship with her, or whether I wanted to keep playing single by maintaining friendships with other women. She said she was tired of feeling like she had to compete with my female friends for my attention and loyalty. Rachel has been giving me the silent treatment for 3 days now, waiting for me to choose between our relationship and my friendships. Meanwhile, she's been texting her male friends more than ever, posting photos with them on social media, and making plans for one-on-one hangouts throughout the week. That story ends right there. The double standard here is so blatant, it's almost impressive. Rachel can maintain friendships with men who've literally expressed romantic interest in her, but OP can't text his platonic female friends. She's created a system where her emotional intelligence makes her trustworthy, while his male brain makes him inherently suspicious. This isn't about security, it's about control disguised as relationship protection. Let's move into our next story about romantic gestures that reveal some concerning patterns. My partner keeps bringing up his ex during arguments. He uses her as an example of how I should act. I've been with Daniel for about 8 months, and he's generally a good partner who treats me well day to day. We have similar interests, enjoy spending time together, and I thought we were building something solid. The problem arises whenever we have any kind of disagreement or conflict, because Daniel has a habit of bringing up his ex-girlfriend as a comparison point. Daniel dated his ex, Maria, for about 3 years before they broke up a year ago. According to Daniel, their breakup was mutual and drama-free, and he speaks about Maria with a lot of respect and admiration. I initially appreciated that he didn't badmouth his ex or harbour obvious resentment about their relationship ending. But somewhere along the way, Daniel's respect for Maria turned into using her as the gold standard for how girlfriends should behave. The first time I noticed this pattern was during a minor argument about household chores. When I mentioned that I felt like I was doing more cleaning than Daniel, he said Maria never complained about housework and actually enjoyed keeping their place organised. I thought it was a weird comment to make, but I figured maybe he was just remembering their relationship through rose-coloured glasses. Most people tend to idealise past relationships after some time has passed, especially if the breakup was amicable. But the comparisons kept coming. When I mentioned feeling stressed about work and needing some emotional support, Daniel said Maria always handled work pressure really well and never brought negative energy home. When I wanted to talk through a problem we were having, Daniel said Maria was better at communicating without getting emotional. Every single disagreement or moment of conflict somehow became an opportunity for Daniel to explain how Maria would have handled the situation differently and better. According to him, Maria was more understanding, more patient, more rational, and more supportive than I was in virtually every scenario. The comparisons weren't just about conflict resolution either. When I mentioned wanting to try a new restaurant, Daniel would say Maria was more adventurous with food. When I suggested a weekend activity, Daniel would mention how Maria was always up for anything and never complained about his ideas. I started feeling like I was competing with a ghost, constantly being measured against someone who apparently never had a bad day, never got stressed, never disagreed with Daniel, and never had any human flaws or limitations. Maria had become this perfect ex-girlfriend who I could never live up to. When I finally told Daniel how uncomfortable his constant comparisons made me feel, he got defensive. He said he wasn't trying to make me feel bad, but that Maria had set a good example of how healthy relationships should work. He claimed he was just trying to help me understand what successful partnership looks like. Daniel explained that his relationship with Maria had been the most mature and functional relationship he'd ever been in, and that he'd learned important lessons from her about communication and compromise. He said he was sharing those insights with me to help our relationship succeed. I pointed out that constantly comparing me to his ex made me feel inadequate and unwanted. Daniel said I was being insecure, and that instead of getting upset about the comparisons, I should use Maria's example as motivation to improve myself and our relationship. The conversation took a bizarre turn when Daniel suggested that I might benefit from talking to Maria directly to get advice about dating him. He said Maria understood him better than anyone and could give me insights about how to make him happy and avoid the kinds of conflicts that stressed him out. When I asked Daniel why he'd broken up with Maria if she was so perfect, he said their breakup had been about timing and life circumstances, rather than any problems with their relationship dynamic. He said they'd been compatible in every way that mattered, but that external factors had made continuing the relationship impractical. Daniel also revealed that he and Maria still talked regularly, and that she'd been giving him advice about our relationship when he shared arguments details about our with her. He said Maria had been encouraging him to be patient with me while I learned how to be a better partner. I was horrified to discover that Daniel had been discussing our private conflicts with his ex-girlfriend and using her feedback to evaluate my behaviour. He'd essentially created a system where Maria was the expert consultant on our relationship, with me as the deficient partner who needed guidance. When I told Daniel that discussing our relationship problems with his ex was a massive violation of privacy and trust, he said I was overreacting. He claimed that getting advice from someone who understood him well was just smart relationship management. The final straw came during our most recent argument about Daniel's work schedule. When I mentioned feeling like we weren't spending enough quality time together, Daniel said Maria had never made him feel guilty about his career priorities and had always been supportive of his professional goals. I told Daniel that if Maria was such a perfect girlfriend, maybe he should try to get back together with her, instead of staying with someone who apparently disappointed him constantly. Daniel said I was being dramatic, my flaws. That, he loved me, despite appointed his ex as the relationship story ends there. Daniel's basically referee while treating his current girlfriend like a defective replacement model. The fact that he's sharing their private arguments with Maria and using her advice to evaluate OP's behaviour is next level inappropriate. You can't build intimacy with someone who's constantly measuring you against their idealised ex. Our next story involves gift giving that shows some interesting priorities. My boyfriend gave away a gift I bought him. He said he didn't like it that much. I've been with Marcus for about 6 months and his birthday was last month. I'd been thinking about what to get him for weeks because I wanted to find something thoughtful that showed how much I cared about him. Marcus is really into photography, and he'd mentioned several times that he wanted to upgrade his camera equipment. After doing research and asking for advice from friends who know about photography, I decided to buy Marcus a high-quality camera lens that he'd been talking about wanting. It wasn't cheap, about $400, but I'd been saving up because I wanted to get him something special for his first birthday since we'd been together. Marcus seemed really excited when he opened the gift. He said it was exactly what he'd been wanting and that he couldn't believe I'd remembered him mentioning it. He thanked me multiple times and said it was one of the best gifts he'd ever received. I felt amazing seeing how happy he was. For the next few weeks, Marcus would occasionally mention the lens and talk about the photos he was planning to take with it. He'd show me pictures he'd found online of the kind of shots the lens was capable of, and he seemed genuinely enthusiastic about using it for his photography projects. Last weekend, I was at Marcus's apartment when his friend Jake stopped by to hang out. Jake noticed the camera lens sitting on Marcus's desk and started asking about it. Marcus explained that it was a birthday gift from me, and Jake mentioned that he'd been looking for that exact model for months. That's when Marcus made a comment that completely shocked me. He told Jake that he could have the lens if he wanted it, since Marcus wasn't using it as much as he'd expected to. Jake was thrilled and immediately started talking about the projects he'd use it for. I watched in disbelief as Marcus handed over the lens I'd spent $400 on, just giving it away to his friend, like it was something he'd found in a drawer. When I asked Marcus what he was doing, he said Jake would get more use out of it, and that it was better to have someone actually using the equipment than letting it sit around. After Jake left with my gift, I told Marcus how hurt I was that he'd given away something I'd carefully chosen and saved up to buy for him. Marcus said he appreciated the thought behind the gift, but that he'd realised the lens wasn't quite what he needed for his photography style. Marcus explained that after using the lens a few times, he'd discovered it wasn't as versatile as he'd hoped. He said rather than letting it collect dust, he thought giving it to Jake was a better use of the equipment. He claimed he was being practical rather than sentimental. I pointed out that giving away a gift, especially one that's expensive, was incredibly hurtful and disrespectful. Marcus said he didn't understand why I was making such a big deal about it when the important thing was that someone would actually use and appreciate the lens. When I explained that the gift represented my feelings for him and the effort I'd put into choosing something meaningful, Marcus said I was being too emotional about material objects. He said the fact that I'd thought of him was what mattered, not what happened to the physical item afterward. Marcus also revealed that he'd been planning to sell the lens online because he needed money for other equipment, but that giving it to Jake seemed like a nicer gesture. He said at least this way, the lens was going to someone who would appreciate it rather than just being sold to a stranger. I asked Marcus how he'd feel if I gave away gifts he'd given me to people who might appreciate them more. Marcus said that would be different because his gifts to me were chosen specifically for my interests and needs, while gift my to him had been well-intentioned but ultimately impractical. The conversation got worse when Marcus suggested that maybe I should have asked him what he actually wanted instead of trying to surprise him with something he might not use. He said that while surprises were nice in theory, practical gifts required more communication to be truly useful. Marcus then offered to buy me dinner to make up for hurting my feelings, but said he hoped I'd understand that his decision about the lens had been logical rather than emotional. He couldn't comprehend why I was more upset about the gift being given away than happy that it was being put to good use. I told Marcus that the issue wasn't about the lens itself, but about the complete lack of consideration he'd shown for my feelings and the significance of the gift. Marcus said he'd learned his lesson about keeping gifts even when they weren't practical, and that next time he'd just put unwanted items in a closet to avoid drama. Yesterday, Marcus mentioned that Jake had been sending him amazing photos taken with the lens and that it was nice to see the equipment being used properly. He seemed completely oblivious to how much his casual attitude about giving away my gift continued to hurt me. That story ends there. Marcus treated a $400 thoughtful gift like a random object he could dispose of whenever convenient, then tried to make OP feel bad for being emotional about material things. The fact that he was planning to sell it for cash before giving it away shows this was never about Jake appreciating it more. Some people truly don't understand that gifts represent care and effort, not just objects to be optimized for utility. Let's dive into our next story about relationship arrangements that come with some interesting revelations. My girlfriend wants to move in together, but still dates other people. She calls it ethical non-monogamy, but never told me that's what she wanted. I've been with Emma for about 7 months, and we've been talking about taking the next step in our relationship by moving in together. Emma brought up the idea about a month ago, saying she was tired of splitting time between our 2 apartments and that living together would be more practical and romantic. I was excited about the prospect of sharing a living space with Emma because I saw it as a natural progression toward a more committed relationship. We started looking at apartments together and discussing how we'd split expenses and household responsibilities. Emma seemed enthusiastic about apartment hunting and would send me listings she found online. We visited several places together, and she'd talk about how we'd decorate different rooms and what our daily routine would look like living together. Last week, we found a great 2-bedroom place that we both loved. Emma was ready to put down a deposit and start the application process. I was thrilled that we'd found somewhere perfect for starting this new chapter of our relationship. That's when Emma mentioned something that completely blindsided me. She casually said that living together would make it easier for her to maintain her other relationships without having to coordinate schedules between different apartments. I had no idea what she was talking about. When I asked Emma to clarify what she meant by other relationships, she seemed surprised that I didn't already know. She explained that she'd been dating other people throughout our entire relationship and assumed I understood that we weren't exclusive. Emma said she practiced ethical non-monogamy and believed that healthy relationships could include multiple romantic partners as long as everyone was honest and communicating openly. She seemed genuinely confused that I thought we were in a monogamous relationship. I pointed out that Emma had never mentioned being non-monogamous or dating other people during our 7 months together. Emma said she'd assumed her lifestyle was obvious from her social media activity and the way she talked about her social life. She claimed she'd never hidden anything from me. When I asked Emma to give me specific examples of how she'd been open about seeing other people, she got vague. She mentioned having active dating app profiles and going out frequently, but acknowledged that she'd never directly told me she was dating others or asked if I was comfortable with non-monogamy. Emma revealed that she'd been seeing at least 3 other people regularly throughout our relationship. She had different partners for different needs and activities, and she said our relationship filled the emotional, intimacy, and domestic partnership role in her life. I was devastated to learn that what I thought was a committed relationship building toward exclusivity had actually been one of several casual arrangements for Emma. I felt like I'd been living in a completely different relationship than the one she thought we were in. When I told Emma that I wasn't comfortable with non-monogamy and had been expecting our relationship to be exclusive, she said I was being possessive and traditional. She said that wanting to control who she dated showed insecurity and an unhealthy attachment style. Emma explained that moving in together would actually strengthen our relationship because it would give us more quality time while allowing her to maintain the variety and independence that kept her happy. She said cohabitation and exclusivity were completely separate concepts. I asked Emma why she wanted to live with me, specifically if she had multiple partners who could fill that role. Emma said I was the most compatible with her for domestic partnership, and that our emotional connection made me the obvious choice for sharing living space. The conversation got more surreal when Emma started explaining the logistics of how non-monogamy would work in our shared apartment. She said she'd need to use the space for dates with other partners occasionally, and that I'd need to be understanding about overnight guests and scheduling conflicts. Emma also mentioned that some of her other partners might need to store belongings at our apartment or use it as a meeting place for group activities. She said that living together meant becoming part of her extended relationship network and supporting all of her connections. When I said I wasn't comfortable with our apartment being used as a hub for Emma's dating life, she accused me of trying to control her autonomy. She said that true love meant supporting your partner's happiness even when it didn't directly benefit you. Emma suggested that maybe I should try non-monogamy myself instead of expecting her to change her relationship style to accommodate my insecurities. She said that once I experienced the freedom and honesty of multiple partnerships, I'd understand why monogamy was restrictive and outdated. I told Emma that I wasn't interested in dating other people and that I'd been hoping to build an exclusive partnership with her. Emma said that was my choice, but that she wouldn't sacrifice her relationship philosophy to make me more comfortable. The conversation ended with Emma saying She hoped I'd think about whether my attachment to monogamy was more important than our connection. She said she was willing to move in together, regardless of whether I decided to embrace non-monogamy or just tolerate it. That story wraps up there. Emma spent 7 months building what OP thought was an exclusive relationship, then casually revealed she'd been dating multiple people the whole time. The fact that she wants to use their shared apartment as a non-monogamy headquarters, while claiming OP as being possessive for expecting basic communication, shows incredible selfishness. You can't spring major relationship structures on someone and then act like they're being unreasonable for not immediately adapting. Moving on to our next story about pet policies that reveal some interesting control dynamics. My partner told me he'd leave if I got another pet, even though he just adopted one without asking me. I've been living with David for about a year now, and we generally have a good partnership when it comes to household decisions and shared responsibilities. We both work full-time and split expenses fairly, and I thought we'd developed a good system for communicating about major decisions that affect both of us. I've always been an animal lover and currently have a cat named Luna, who I adopted about 2 years ago, before David and I moved in together. Luna is well behaved, uses her litter box consistently, and doesn't cause any damage to our apartment. David seemed fine with Luna when we first started living together. About 3 months ago, I started mentioning that I was thinking about getting a second cat. Luna seemed lonely during the day while we were both at work, and I thought having a companion might be good for her. I'd been researching the process of introducing a second cat to our household. David immediately shot down the idea, one saying that cat was enough and that adding another pet would be too much work and expense. He said our apartment wasn't big enough for multiple animals and that he didn't want to deal with additional litter box maintenance and pet-related responsibilities. I was disappointed, but tried to be understanding of David's concerns. I suggested we could visit some shelters together to see if there were any cats that might be a good fit, or that we could foster a cat temporarily to see how Luna reacted to having a companion. David said he wasn't interested in exploring options and that his position on getting a second cat was final. He said that if I brought another animal into our shared living space without his agreement, he'd have to reconsider whether we were compatible as roommates and partners. I felt hurt that David wouldn't even consider the possibility, especially since taking care of Luna had always been entirely my responsibility. I pay for her food, litter, vet bills and toys, and I'm the one who cleans her litter box and handles all pet-related tasks. Last week, David came home with a surprise that completely changed the dynamic of our pet situation. He'd adopted a dog from a rescue organisation, a medium-sized mixed breed named Max, who was about 2 years old. David presented this as a spontaneous decision that he'd made after visiting the rescue with a co-worker. I was shocked that David had adopted a pet without discussing it with me, especially after being so adamant about not adding another animal to our household. When I pointed out this contradiction, David said that dogs were different from cats and that Max would be a good addition to our family. David explained that Max was already house-trained and wouldn't require as much maintenance as a second cat would have. He said dogs were more interactive and useful than cats, and that Max could provide security for our apartment when we weren't home. I asked David how he'd feel if I'd brought home a second cat without consulting him, the way he'd brought home Max without asking me. David said that would be completely different because we'd already discussed the cat situation, and he'd clearly expressed his opposition to it. When I pointed out that we'd never discussed getting a dog, David said that was because dog adoption had been a spontaneous opportunity that he couldn't pass up. He said Max had been scheduled to be euthanized if nobody adopted him that day, so David had felt obligated to save his life. David also revealed that Max would be primarily his responsibility, unlike my suggestion for a second cat that would have added to our shared household duties. He said since he'd be handling all of Max's care and expenses, my input on the adoption wasn't necessary. The conversation got heated when I mentioned that Max was significantly larger than a second cat would have been, and that a dog would have much more impact on our living space than another small animal. David said I was being petty and trying to punish him for doing something kind for an animal in need. David then made it clear that his ultimatum about me getting a second cat still stood, even though he'd now added a dog to our household. He said Max was different because he'd made the decision himself and would take full responsibility for the consequences. When I asked why my desire for a second pet was unreasonable, while his spontaneous dog adoption was acceptable, David said I was trying to create false equivalencies. He claimed that his decision-making about pets was better informed than mine because he'd actually visited the rescue and seen the animals in need, while I was just thinking abstractly about wanting another cat. I pointed out that I'd been researching cat adoption for months and visiting local shelters, so my interest wasn't abstract at all. David said that didn't matter because he'd already made his position clear about additional cats, and that bringing Max home didn't change his feelings about feline overpopulation in our apartment. The argument escalated when David said that if I couldn't accept his decision about Max and respect his boundaries about additional cats, then maybe we weren't compatible as partners. He said healthy relationships required compromise, and that my refusal to support his dog adoption showed I was being selfish. David has been treating Max like the perfect addition to our household, while continuing to insist that a second cat would be disruptive and inappropriate. He's been posting photos of Max on social media and talking about how much joy the dog has brought to his life. Meanwhile, Max has been significantly more disruptive than another cat would have been. He barks at neighbours, chews on furniture, and requires multiple walks per day that affect our schedules. David has been asking me to help with dog walking duties while maintaining that Max is entirely his responsibility. Yesterday, David mentioned that he was thinking about getting Max a companion dog because he seemed lonely during the day. When I reminded him of his previous arguments about apartment space and pet-related expenses, David said that was different because he was talking about dogs that would both be his pets. That story ends there. The hypocrisy here is breathtaking. David vetoed OP's second cat because one pet was enough, then brought home a dog without permission, and is now considering a second dog. He's created a system where his pet decisions are spontaneous acts of kindness, while hers are selfish household disruptions. The fact that he's now asking for help with Max, while insisting it's entirely his responsibility, shows he never intended to follow through on his promises. Our next story deals with financial arrangements that take an interesting turn. My boyfriend borrowed money from me and gave it to his ex. He said she needed it more. I've been with Tyler for about 14 months now, and we've generally had a good relationship built on trust and mutual support. We both work steady jobs and have been financially independent, but like most couples, we occasionally help each other out when unexpected expenses come up. Last month, Tyler asked if he could borrow $800 from me to cover some car repairs that his insurance wouldn't pay for. He said his mechanic needed payment upfront and that he wouldn't get his next paycheck for another week. I was happy to help since Tyler had loaned me money before when I needed it. Tyler seemed genuinely grateful when I transferred the money to his account, and he promised to pay me back as soon as his paycheck came in. He said he hated having to ask for financial help, but that he didn't have anyone else he could turn to for such a significant amount on short notice. 2 weeks passed and Tyler got his paycheck as expected. When I casually mentioned the loan repayment, Tyler said he was still waiting for some other expenses to clear before he could pay me back. He assured me it would just be a few more days and that he hadn't forgotten about our arrangement. After another week went by, I asked Tyler directly when I could expect to be repaid. Tyler seemed uncomfortable and said he was having some temporary cash flow issues, but would definitely get me the money soon. He said he appreciated my patience and promised to prioritize paying me back. Yesterday, I discovered what had actually happened to the $800 I'd loaned Tyler. I was at his apartment when his phone buzzed with a text notification, and I could see part of the message on his lock screen. It was from someone named Jessica, thanking him for helping with her security deposit and saying she'd pay him back when she could. When I asked Tyler who Jessica was and what security deposit she was referring to, he got flustered and tried to change the subject. After some pressing, Tyler admitted that Jessica was his ex-girlfriend and that he'd given her the money I'd loaned him to help her move into a new apartment. I was shocked that Tyler had taken money I'd given him for car repairs and instead used it to help his ex-girlfriend with her housing situation. Tyler tried to explain that Jessica had been in a desperate situation, facing homelessness if she couldn't come up with a security deposit, and that helping her had been an emergency. Tyler said that when Jessica had called him crying about her housing crisis, he couldn't just ignore someone he'd cared about, who was in serious trouble. He claimed that his car repairs could wait, but that Jessica's need for housing was more urgent and time-sensitive. I pointed out that Tyler had lied to me about what the money was for, and had made a unilateral decision to redirect my loan to his ex-girlfriend without asking my permission. Tyler said he hadn't technically lied because he'd originally intended to use the money for car repairs before Jessica's emergency came up. When I asked Tyler why he hadn't just explained the situation and asked if I'd be comfortable with the money going to his ex instead, Tyler said he knew I would have said no, and that Jessica couldn't wait for me to make a decision about helping her. Tyler revealed that Jessica had been evicted from her previous apartment and had only a few days to secure new housing before ending up on the street. He said that, as someone who'd once loved her, he felt morally obligated to help when she had nowhere else to turn. I asked Tyler how Jessica had gone from being his ex to someone he felt responsible for supporting financially. Tyler explained that they'd maintained a friendship after their breakup, and that she'd been going through a particularly difficult period with job loss and family problems. The conversation got worse when Tyler said he hoped I could understand that helping Jessica had been about basic human decency rather than any romantic feelings. He said that anyone with compassion would have done the same thing in his position, regardless of their history with the person needing help. Tyler also mentioned that Jessica was planning to pay him back once she got settled in her new job, and that he'd then be able to repay me. He seemed to think this arrangement would solve everyone's problems, and that I should be patient while waiting for the money to filter back through his ex-girlfriend. When I told Tyler that using my money to support his ex, without my knowledge, felt like a betrayal, Tyler accused me of being heartless and unsympathetic to people in crisis situations. He said that my anger about helping someone avoid homelessness revealed concerning priorities about money versus human welfare. Tyler suggested that maybe this situation was a good test of my character and my ability to support him when he made difficult moral decisions. He said he'd hoped I would be proud of him for helping someone in need rather than upset about the logistics of how it happened. I told Tyler that the issue wasn't helping people in crisis, but about honesty and respect in our relationship. Using money I'd loaned him for one purpose, to help his ex-girlfriend, without telling me, crossed multiple boundaries around trust and financial responsibility. Tyler said he understood why I was upset, but that he'd make the same decision again if faced with a similar situation. He said he couldn't be with someone who would expect him to ignore a friend's desperate need for help just because that friend happened to be his ex-girlfriend. That story ends there. Tyler essentially used OP as an unknowing third-party lender for his ex-girlfriend's housing crisis, then tried to frame it as a moral test of OP's character. The fact that he's still in close enough contact with his ex that she calls him crying about personal emergencies says everything about where his priorities lie. You don't get to redirect someone's loan to your ex and then act like they're heartless for being upset about it. Let's move into our next story about hobbies that apparently don't meet certain standards of maturity. My girlfriend makes fun of my hobbies. She calls them childish in front of other people. I've been with Sarah for about 9 months, and we get along well in most areas of our relationship. We have good chemistry, enjoy each other's company, and generally support each other's goals and interests. The one ongoing source of tension has been around my hobbies and how Sarah talks about them, especially in social situations. I'm really into building and painting miniature models, specifically for tabletop gaming. It's something I've enjoyed since I was a teenager, and it's evolved into a serious hobby that I find relaxing and rewarding. I have a dedicated workspace in my apartment where I spend a few hours each week working on detailed models and terrain pieces. I'm also part of a gaming group that meets twice a month to play strategic board games and tabletop RPGs. These are complex games that require planning, problem solving, and creativity. Our group includes people from various professions, including doctors, engineers, and teachers, so it's not just random kids playing games. Sarah seemed fine with my hobbies when we first started dating. She'd ask questions about what I was working on and seemed interested in the artistic and technical aspects of model building. She even came to watch one of our gaming sessions and said she was impressed by how strategic and collaborative the games were. But somewhere around the 3-month mark, Sarah started making comments about my hobbies being juvenile and time-consuming. She'd roll her eyes when I mentioned working on models and would make jokes about grown men playing with toys. At first, I thought she was just teasing in a playful way. The comments escalated when we started spending time with Sarah's friends and co-workers. Sarah would introduce me and then immediately make jokes about my hobbies, calling them childish pastimes that I needed to grow out of. She'd get laughs from her audience by describing my gaming group as a bunch of nerds playing make-believe. Last month at Sarah's work holiday party, she told a group of her colleagues that I still played with action figures like a little kid. When I tried to correct her and explain that model building was a legitimate artistic hobby, Sarah said I was being defensive about something everyone could see was immature. Sarah started referring to my gaming nights as daycare for adults and would make comments about how I prioritize playing games over spending time with her. She'd schedule date activities during my regular gaming sessions and then get upset when I said I'd already made commitments to my group. When I explained that my hobbies were important to me and that I'd appreciate more respect for how I chose to spend my free time, Sarah said she was just being honest about what other people thought. She claimed that most adults found gaming hobbies embarrassing and that she was trying to help me see how others perceived my interests. Sarah suggested that I should consider taking up more mature hobbies like golf or wine tasting that would make better conversation topics at social events. She said that miniature painting and tabletop games made me seem immature and would limit my professional networking opportunities. The situation came to a head at Sarah's birthday party 2 weeks ago. In front of about 20 people, Sarah announced that she was trying to house train me by weaning me off childish hobbies and teaching me age-appropriate activities. She got a big laugh by describing my model collection as a toy chest that needed to be put away. I was humiliated and told Sarah privately that her public mockery of my interests was hurtful and disrespectful. Sarah said I was being overly sensitive and that if my hobbies weren't embarrassing, I wouldn't mind people knowing about them. When I pointed out that Sarah's interests included reality TV and celebrity gossip, which weren't exactly intellectual pursuits, Sarah said that was completely different. She claimed that her interests were normal social activities that helped her connect with other people, while mine were isolating and weird. Sarah also revealed that she'd been hoping I would naturally outgrow my gaming phase once we got serious about our relationship. She said that most men abandoned childish hobbies when they found mature romantic partnerships and started focusing on adult responsibilities. The conversation ended with Sarah saying that she loved me, but that my hobbies were a source of embarrassment that affected how people viewed both of us as a couple. She said that if I wanted to be taken seriously as an adult, I needed to consider whether playing games was more important than our relationship's reputation. Sarah has been giving me articles about hobby addiction and suggesting couples activities that could replace my gaming nights. She's been treating my interests like a problem that needs to be solved rather than a legitimate way to spend my free time. That story ends there. Sarah's turned OP's legitimate artistic hobby into public entertainment by mocking him in front of friends and colleagues. The fact that she thinks golf and wine tasting are inherently more mature than detailed model building shows she doesn't understand what hobbies actually involve. A partner who uses your interests as punchlines at parties doesn't respect you as a person. Moving to our next story about memory patterns that reveal some interesting priorities. My partner forgets every important date, but remembers every little detail about his ex. I've been with Jason for about 10 months now, and while our relationship has many positive aspects, there's one pattern that's been increasingly bothering me. Jason seems to have selective memory issues when it comes to important dates and details in our relationship, but perfect recall for anything related to his ex-girlfriend. Jason has forgotten our anniversary twice, my birthday, and several dates we'd planned weeks in advance. He's missed dinner reservations I made for special occasions and shown up late to events that were important to me because he simply forgot they were happening. When I bring up these lapses, Jason always apologizes and says he's terrible with dates and forgets important things all the time. But here's what doesn't add up. Jason can tell you exactly when his ex-girlfriend got her promotion at work 2 years ago, what she wore to their first date, the anniversary of when they moved in together, and even the specific date she adopted her cat. When his ex posts something on social media, Jason notices immediately and often brings up details from her posts in casual conversation. He remembers her favourite restaurants, her birthday, her family members' names, and stories from their relationship with perfect clarity. He can recall the exact timeline of their breakup and quote conversations they had months before they ended things. Meanwhile, Jason consistently forgets when we have dinner plans, can't remember what I told him about my work presentations, and has never once remembered the dates we first said, "I love you" to each other. He's forgotten my middle name multiple times, doesn't know my best friend's last name, and couldn't tell you what I studied in college without thinking about it. Last week, Jason spent 20 minutes telling me about how his ex was having problems at her new job, including specific details about her co-workers and office politics that she'd apparently shared with him recently. But the same day, he forgot that I had a job interview I'd been nervous about for weeks, and didn't even ask how it went when I got home. When I pointed out this pattern to Jason, he said I was being paranoid and jealous. He claimed that his ex was just easier to remember things about because they'd shared more experiences together over a longer period of time. He said my expectations about his memory were unrealistic and that I was keeping score in an unhealthy way. Jason explained that he and his ex had been together for 3 years compared to our 10 months. So naturally, he'd have more detailed memories about their relationship. He said it wasn't fair to compare how well he remembered someone he'd lived with to how well he remembered our newer relationship. But Jason's detailed knowledge about his ex isn't just from their past relationship. He knows current information about her life that he could only know from ongoing communication. He knows about her recent job changes, her family drama, her dating life, and her future plans, with an accuracy that suggests regular contact. When I asked Jason how often he and his ex actually talk, he got defensive and said they were just friends who checked in occasionally. But his level of knowledge about her day-to-day life suggests much more frequent communication than he's admitting to. Jason also revealed that his ex often asks him for advice about decisions in her life, and that he feels obligated to help her work through problems because of their history together. He said she valued his opinion and trusted his judgment in ways that current friends couldn't replicate. The conversation ended with Jason saying that his memory patterns weren't intentional, and that I was reading too much into normal variations in how people remember different relationships. He said he loved me, and that his ability to recall details about his ex didn't diminish his feelings for our current relationship. But I can't shake the feeling that Jason's perfect memory for his ex and terrible memory for our relationship reflects his actual priorities and emotional investment. You don't forget every important detail about someone you care deeply about while maintaining encyclopedic knowledge about someone who's supposedly just a friend. That story ends there. It's pretty telling when someone can remember their ex's cat's adoption anniversary, but forgets their current partner's job interview. Jason's claiming his ex is just easier to remember because of their longer history, but he's remembering current details about her life that require ongoing communication. The selective memory thing is usually less about actual memory problems and more about what your brain decides is worth storing. Let's dive into our next story about public proposals that take an unexpected turn. My boyfriend proposed to me as a joke in public, then laughed when I got emotional. I've been with Derek for about 8 months now, and while our relationship has had its ups and downs, I genuinely thought we were heading in a serious direction. Derek has a very sarcastic sense of humour and loves being the centre of attention in social situations, which I've mostly learned to appreciate even when his jokes push boundaries. Last weekend, we were at his friend Marcus's birthday party at this trendy rooftop bar downtown. There were probably 30 people there, including several mutual friends and some people I'd never met before. Derek had been drinking throughout the evening and was in full entertainer mode, cracking jokes and telling stories that had everyone laughing. About 2 hours into the party, Derek suddenly got everyone's attention by clinking his glass with a fork. He announced that he had something important to say and asked everyone to gather around. I assumed he was going to make a toast to Marcus or tell some funny story about their friendship. Instead, Derek got down on one knee right there on the rooftop, pulled out what looked like a ring box, and started this elaborate speech about how much he loved me. He was talking about our future together, how I was the woman of his dreams, and how he couldn't imagine life without me. Everyone was recording with their phones and cheering. My heart was racing, and I felt like I might cry from happiness. This wasn't how I'd imagined getting engaged, but seeing Derek pour his heart out in front of all his friends felt incredibly romantic and genuine. I was ready to say yes before he even asked the question. Derek opened the ring box, and inside was a plastic ring from a gumball machine. The crowd erupted in laughter as Derek asked if I would marry him, but he was grinning like this was the funniest thing in the world. I realized immediately that the entire proposal had been an elaborate joke for everyone's entertainment. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and hurt. Everyone was laughing and taking pictures while I stood there trying to process what had just happened. Derek was still on one knee, holding up the plastic ring and waiting for my response like this was all hilarious. I managed to force a smile and play along because I didn't want to cause a scene at his friend's birthday party. I said yes sarcastically and put on the plastic ring while everyone cheered and laughed. Derek jumped up and hugged me, still chuckling about his brilliant prank. Well, that's a wrap on tonight's collection of relationship disasters that probably made you either hug your partner a little tighter or reconsider your entire dating strategy. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe because the internet has an endless supply of these stories, and I'll be back tomorrow with more. Until then, maybe send your partner a text letting them know you appreciate them not being completely unhinged. Take care, everyone.